It is 4 minutes after 10, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC on a day when, you think you've seen it all before, don't you? What do they say? There's nothing new under the sun. Or if you hang around long enough, everything comes back into fashion. I don't know. And I've been, in this job or my previous jobs for quite a long time now, and I've witnessed some fairly rum shenanigans, if you'd allow me to turn into a P.G. Woodhouse character just for a moment. There's some very rum shenanigans going on there, Jeeves. But this story is absolutely breathtaking. No, I'm going to go in early. Sorry. If you've been paying attention this week, you'll know what word I'm trying to excise from my vocabulary, or at least reduce, but sometimes it's the only word that will do. This story is absolutely extraordinary. Conservative MP, or suspended Conservative MP, technically I suppose he's no longer an MP, called Mark Menzies, who hadn't troubled the score as much previously. God, I have turned into a P.G. Woodhouse character. Where did that phrase come? Hadn't troubled the score as much previously. Stands accused of, all manner of misdemeanours and misbehaviours. And what's most remarkable about it is that the scandal has been known to the party bigwigs, who've been trying to turn Angela Rayner's 10-year-old sale of a ex-council house that may have involved the failure to pay £1,000 or £2,000 in capital gains tax. They have been trying to inflate that great big nothing burger on a daily basis with the help of client media, of course, all the client journalists queuing up to make a fool of themselves again in exactly the same way they did over Keir Starmer's curry, while knowing that a Tory MP was literally caught up in what can only be described in the finest of tabloid traditions as a drugs and rent boy scandal. Did you know it's even got an immigration angle? And the immigration angle is, according to the Daily Mirror, and I presume this headline supports the story that follows, but according to the Daily Mirror, Tory MP's rent boy lover was in Britain illegally after being refused entry 3 times. Mark Menzies under pressure to reveal what he knew about Brazilian male prostitute Rogério Santos' immigration status. So it's even got an immigration angle, this story. But, of course, if you consume some corners, if you rely upon some corners of the UK media for your political news, you will know next to nothing about this and everything about a house that Angela Rayner sold in 2013, I think, was it? No, 2015, on which she may or may not have been due to pay some capital gains tax that she probably didn't know about. And even if she was due to pay it, as Matthew Parris, the former Conservative MP, wrote in the House of Commons yesterday, in the Times newspaper yesterday, it would be an absolute heap of beans, an absolute nothing burger. Anyway, 7 minutes after 10. So here's my problem, and I don't expect you to feel unduly sorry for me, but I can't get a phone in out of this. How do you get a phone in out of a drugs and rent boy scandal? I could talk about it for the best part of half an hour. I could fill you in on all the grisly details, but at the end of that, I don't think that a question. Sometimes you may have noticed this during our time together. Sometimes I do start thinking that this isn't a phone-in. I don't normally start at 10 o'clock thinking that this isn't a phone-in, but I might introduce something into the conversation a little later and think to myself, well, I'll just share my thoughts on this, but I don't think it's going to be one of those stories where I invite you to share yours. But I can't. And usually, sometimes I get to the end of my own contemplations and explanations, and I find unexpectedly that a helpful question, a felicitous invitation to you to ring in has presented itself, has popped up unexpectedly. I can't see it happening with this. I mean, not least, it is still largely in the realms of allegation, although allegations considered serious enough to prompt a suspension. The misusing, I have to. But listen, we're going to do a phone-in about how hard it is to get hold of medicine. Okay, so hold on to your horses for that. It's the middle of the night. I mean, the Times have written it up like a John le Carré novel. The phone call came in the dead of night. You can't normally write that in a news story. The dead of night. That's like something from fiction, isn't it? No one says the dead of night in real life. So you don't sort of phone your mum, do you, in the dead of night? Or I caught the night bus. I caught the night bus home last night. Really? What time? Oh, it was the dead of night. It was the dead of... So they've let the Times have let their journalist, Billy Kember, who's done a banging job on this, to coin a technical term. They've let him loose with the old lyrical liberties. The phone call came in the dead of night. Are you on your own? The man said, with urgency in his voice. Again, you never put that in a news story. This is on page 12 of the Times. Yeah, I think I am going to be talking about this for a while. So apologies if you were waiting for a more traditional phone-in. The phone call came in the dead of night. This is also my audition for doing other audiobooks. I've done my own audiobook, which features a few accents, or at least attempts at slightly Mickey-taking interpretations of public figures' voices. But I haven't done one straight like I could do The phone call came in the dead of night. Are you on your own? The man said, with urgency in his voice. I've got in with some bad people and they've got me locked in a flat and they want £5,000 to release me. I've never heard Mark Menzies' voice. He probably sounds like Jacob Rees-Mogg, but that just seemed to fit the text that we are examining at the moment. The caller was Mark Menzies, 52, the Conservative MP for Fylde in Lancashire and a government trade envoy. Now, I am a great fan, as you know, of Full Disclosure. Not just the podcast, but the practice. So I should tell you, I don't like Fylde. Fylde routinely rob Kidderminster Harriers of both glory, victory, goals and players. So I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet about Fylde. They have, over the last few years, become something of a rival, an arch rival to Kidderminster Harriers. So I do want to get that front and centre in case I allow it to influence my coverage of this story involving the current MP for Fylde. I like that from Jamie. He asks, was it a dark and stormy night, James? I mean, they could almost have opened with that line. In fact, I'm going to slightly embellish the Times coverage of this story. It was a dark and stormy night. The phone call came in the dead of it. Are you on your own? The man said with urgency in his voice. I've got in with some bad people and they've got me locked in a flat and they want £5,000 to release me. The caller was Mark Menzies, 52, the Conservative MP for Fylde in Lancashire and a government trade envoy. Where is he a government trade envoy for? What do they think about this? I remember when they made Dominic Kaczynski the government trade envoy for Outer Mongolia. You think I'm joking, but I'm not. Just as an indication of how much the world turns, Dominic Kaczynski went to one of those weird NatCon conferences once, and he got told off by the party leadership for knocking about with weirdos and crypto-fascists. And these days, former cabinet ministers can go along to it without Rishi Sunak being prepared to say boo to a goose. He had rung his 78-year-old former campaign manager. This is at 3:30 a.m. A woman whom the Times is not naming, waking her in the night and asking her to hand over thousands of pounds from a bank account containing donations to the MP's campaign. There's 2 pages of this, so rest assured I'll be moving on at 3:15. But the allegations that follow, and the Times have clearly done their homework on this, involve the money being stumped up by a constituency office manager who told friends that she'd cashed in her ISA to get hold of it. By then, the sum had risen to £6,500. Later that day, having been rescued from the flat, the Times reports today, Menzies rang the woman again and told her he'd summoned one of his staffers to London to collect him from the flat, and on arrival, the junior staffer handed over his own money, thought to be a few £100s, which Menzies said he owed to 2 other men. Asked if he was... I'm reading this from the Times newspaper, not from, I don't know, a Gilly Cooper novel. Asked if he was concerned he could be blackmailed again, Menzies said he'd change his phone number. And the following day, on another call, he said he needed another £35,000 for medical bills. And when he was told there was no more money in the campaign funds bank account from which some of this cash would subsequently be secured, he replied apparently, "Oh, we'll raise some more." A source close to Menzies said the MP had met a man on an online dating website and gone to their flat before going with another man to a second address where he continued drinking. It was falsely claimed that he had been sick at one point, and several people at the address then demanded £5,000, claiming it was for cleaning up and other expenses. The source said Menzies decided to pay them because he was scared of what would happen otherwise, but didn't have the funds to transfer the money from his own savings, and his aides gave him money, quotes, as friends who wanted to help. And on it goes. But of course, the big political story of the moment is the fact that in 2015, Angela Rayner sold a former council flat, upon which point she may have been responsible for about 1,500 quid in capital gains tax. That is the indicator of... And do you know why that story's in the news? In fact, I'm going to play you a little clip of the bloke who is responsible for this story being in the news. I am not really in a position to criticise people for many things. Having an enormous forehead is one of them. I am overly blessed in that department. Oddly, it's not as disproportionate as it used to be. I think my body has caught up with my head as the years have passed. But as a young boy, I was nicknamed Mekon, not always affectionately, by some of my peers. And therefore I shouldn't really be one to throw stones in a glass house. But this bloke's forehead is almost as big as his embarrassment in the following clip from Sky News. I'll play you that, and then we'll have a little rest, and then I'll decide what we're going to do next. Are you still with me at the back? Good. So this is the bloke who is responsible for reinflating the Angela Rayner nothing burger and getting the police involved to the point where I read that there are currently 12 officers investigating the offences that James Daly has brought to the authorities' attention. So who better than James Daly to tell us exactly what the alleged offences are? And of course, as a deputy chairman of the Conservative Party, one has to presume that he would be party to this story about Mark Menzies. I presume that is a significant enough position to be in the room where it happens. So when they're talking about how desperate they are to keep this story away from the news, to keep Mark Menzies away from, well, not to put too fine a point on it, illegal immigrant rent boys, that he would be part of those conversations. So, he is the man. He is your man. He is your go-to guy for finding out about the allegations against Angela Rayner because he is the man who has made them. Over to Sky News journalists Beth Rigby and Jane Secker, joined in the studio by James Daly and the Labour MP Chris Bryant.
Rishi Sunak made the point that perhaps Keir Starmer should spend less time reading books and encouraging his deputy leader to read the rules around tax returns. How concerned are you about this new investigation to Angela Rayner?
Well, what is the allegation? James, you're the person who's made the allegation. What is it that you're alleging Angela Rayner has done?
The matter is with Greater Manchester Police, as they've confirmed.
You wrote to them to demand that they investigate something. What did you ask them to investigate?
Just shout a bit louder, just so none of us can hear. Unlike Chris, who shouts and makes all sorts of public allegations, what I want to do is an allegation has been made to the police. The police are investigating that. Let's give them the time and the opportunity to do that, which I thought was the the Labour Party's position.
What do you think she's done wrong?
I've just answered that question, and this is typical of what we go here, shouting very loudly.
But what are your concerns? What are the concerns that you put to the police?
There's been information, I think, the Greater Manchester Police released, or certainly appeared to release to the Times, and those, I think, are the broad framing of the matters that they are considering. But, and you may disagree with this, Chris definitely, in his shouting, definitely disagrees with me, but I believe that the Greater Manchester Police should be able to look into these allegations in the way that they think is appropriate.
What are the allegations?
I don't understand why you're not comfortable saying.
Well, we clearly have a different point of view. The allegations or the matters that are being investigated are with the Greater Manchester Police. It is my view that rather than debating allegations in public and rather than going through evidence or not evidence, we should allow the Greater Manchester Police to investigate these matters fully and thoroughly and let justice take its course.
Sorry, can I just jump in?
Yeah.
You wrote to the police. Did you not put concerns with allegations? Didn't you write to them about it? Am I misunderstanding?
Absolutely.
So what did you ask them? Why won't you say it's
I asked,
weird?
no, well, this is it. This is the difference of opinion, which clearly I am in a minority in respect to this. I asked the police to investigate certain matters that were in the public domain regarding regarding certain things. My point is, which I don't think is an unreasonable point, is that I want the police to be given the time and the space to be able to investigate those matters. That was the Labour Party position. And that's my view, Beth. You may disagree with it, but that's my view.
I'm just curious as to if you wrote to the police and did you ask them to investigate tax matters? Did you ask them to investigate electoral roll issues? That's all I
think there are a number of matters, and I think that some of the issues that you've raised there are included within that. But I don't want to comment on a police investigation. The police are investigating these matters, and I want to allow them to do that without me, as a politician, commenting on what they should do or what they shouldn't do.
Well, at least no one would have the front to try to respond to questions about Mark Menzies by bringing Angela Rayner into it.
It takes the Times, it takes the newspaper then to actually bring this investigation to some kind of conclusion. That's the reality, isn't it?
Quite often it is a journalist who uncovers wrongdoing. It seems to have been what's happened in the case of Angela Rayner as well, with the home.
All right, okay, I hear on that.
Well. But quite often the journalists are the answer to that.
Sorry, no one except Grant Shapps would try to turn a question about Mark Menzies and the illegal immigrant rent boys, the mysteriously redirected party funds and sundry other scandals into a nothing burger involving Angela Rayner. It is 22 minutes after 10, and now we'll start the programme proper. I just felt that Mark Menzies story was so extraordinary, and I use the word advisedly, that it would have been remiss not to open with it. But I didn't, as I suspected wouldn't happen. I didn't find myself edging towards an actual phone-in question as the more we examined it. And this is a much more, by any objective measure, this is a much more important story. Not only that, it's very, very domestic. It's entirely homegrown, and spares us perhaps the heartbreak and horror of contemplating matters Middle Eastern again. Drug shortages are and I'm quoting here from the Nuffield Trust, a health think tank, independent experts. Do you remember independent experts? Seems almost cruel to bring independent experts into a conversation shortly after saying the words Grant Shapps or indeed James Daly. But independent experts describe a new normal being the unavailability of pharmaceutical drugs. This is a conversation about medicines, not about illegal drugs or recreational drugs. Doctors, pharmacists, the NHS, and of course patients are unable to get their usual medication. And if you want numbers, in 2020, 648 warnings were issued regarding supply problems for certain products. Last year, that figure doubled to 1,000. It's more than doubled to 1,634. The lead author of the Nuffield Trust's report says the rise in shortages of vital medicines from rare to commonplace has been a shocking development that few would have expected a decade ago. I think the key word here is exacerbated, because Brexit is the reason given by the independent experts for the exacerbation of already existing problems. Direct comparisons with, for example, other EU countries show that we are doing worse. We are having more problems. It is not the case that had we stayed in the European Union, these problems would not exist. It would be dishonest and unhelpful to think so. But there are two stories here, aren't there? The first is that it's real and it's happening to you, and I want to know about it. Okay, we've done this once before. And the second, and Will has texted to remind me that a shortage of drugs was actually cited by Remain campaigners and labelled Project Fear by Leavers. You're absolutely right. And I've mentioned to you before that I catch myself having an odd response to Brexit stories now. If you're new to the programme, you may not know that Brexit, in many ways, getting Brexit right, getting every single thing right about Brexit, albeit too late to make any difference to the referendum result, is kind of what propelled this programme into a space it hadn't previously occupied. We not only got everything right about Brexit, we developed an uncanny knack for attracting people to the programme who thought they were right about Brexit, who would then fall apart in quite spectacular fashion. Everyone from Jacob Rees-Mogg down to your Auntie Doris would fall apart in quite spectacular fashion because they either said things that have subsequently been shown to be utter bilge, or they said things at the time which we managed to show were utter bilge. But and oddly, so if you're looking for a Brexit benefit, the only one you'll ever find is my career, and I say that with a very bittersweet tone. But even I now find myself thinking, should we talk about this without mentioning Brexit? Is it unhelpful to bring Brexit into it? It is being cited by independent experts as a key factor in the phenomenon, but the phenomenon is so important to our national interest and to you, to me, to people, to humans, that I feel almost duty-bound to find a way into it that manages to swerve the continuing rancour and unpleasantness that Brexit brings to the table. And listen, I know it brings rancour and unpleasantness to the table because some people still insist that the polar opposite of what they voted for is actually secretly what they voted for, or that there is a good Brexit and it goes to a different school, or that none of the problems caused by Brexit are actually caused by Brexit. And that's why it's not yet time to be honest about things and start undoing some of the damage. But can you have a conversation about Brexit-related problems yet in this country? That's the second bit. That's the second bit of the topic. But it's by far the least important bit, and it's very much a personal inquiry. What I would like you to do now is tell me directly how this affects you. So we know that type 2 diabetes medication, we know that ADHD medication, we know that epilepsy medication have been hit hard. We know that 3 ADHD drugs that were in short supply were meant to be back in normal circulation by the end of last year, but they are not. We know that lives are being imperiled. We know that health is being imperiled. Patients with serious illnesses, pharmacy bosses warned this morning, are having their health and indeed their potential survival compromised. Charities have seen a sharp rise in calls from patients unable to get their drugs. One says, this is the head of external affairs at the Epilepsy Society. I mean, epilepsy can be an incredibly debilitating condition, but a miracle of modern science is that it can be controlled. Some people never have another seizure again after their first one. If it's properly diagnosed and properly treated and the access to medication is complete, you can never have another seizure again. You never stop being epileptic, or some patients never stop being epileptic, but you never have to have another seizure again because the medication is so effective. And this is what the head of external affairs at the Epilepsy Society tells us. Our helpline has been inundated with calls from desperate people having to travel miles, often visiting multiple pharmacies to try to access their medication. So the entire government is queuing up to pretend that Angela Rayner's tax arrangements are the single, and much of the UK media. Front page of the Telegraph today, Angela Rayner. Front page of the Guardian, people with epilepsy having to tour the country searching for a pharmacy that stocks the drugs that they took for granted until 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago. So I want to start with stories. I want to start with your stories and the lengths you are going to as a patient, or the lengths your patients are going to as a doctor or a pharmacist, or the reality of your experience as a doctor or as a pharmacist. And not just the logistics of it. I don't just want you to tell me about the difficulties, the saga, the journeys that you're making, the desperate phone calls, the midnight trips. I want to know from medical professionals what this does to you psychologically. I don't think when you became a doctor or a nurse or a pharmacist, I don't think you ever thought you would see a day where looking patients in the eye and telling them you don't know where they're going to get their drugs from had become commonplace. Simon suggests that he could treat his diabetes with sovereignty, which brings us back to the much smaller element of this story, which is Brexit. But let's park that for a minute and let's look instead at the reality. So either you're the patient and you can tell me what you're having to do to get the stuff that used to be easy to get, or you're the healthcare professional and you can tell me what you're having to do to help the patients get the stuff they need that used to be easy to get, but also what it does to your sense of professional fulfillment or even pride. I always try and think of things that aren't immediately obvious when we find ourselves returning to territory that we've explored before. And there it is. You are a doctor and you are telling an ADHD patient or an epilepsy patient or a diabetic person, you're telling them, well, you need this, but I don't know where you're going to get it. Can you talk me through that, do you think? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. 10:35 is the time. Just a quick nod to anyone who was listening yesterday. Bob's been in touch, possibly referring to some of the accents I essayed in the opening to today's programme. Hello, James. Do all your audiobook voices sound like Bob, the clotted cream-selling taxi driver? No, they don't, actually. Some of them are really good. You'll have to buy the audiobook or download the audiobook to find out. Now, when you send me a text, I obviously have no way of checking its provenance. We work generally on the presumption that you're not going to try and pull the wool over our eyes or yank our chains. The same is true of callers, although over the years I've developed a slightly more reliable antennae with callers than I can ever have with texts if people are being mischievous or being naughty. I've got absolutely no reason whatsoever to doubt what Sophie is telling me in one of the first texts to come into the programme this morning. But I'm just going to warn you, it's not pretty. Dear James, last April, my brother, who suffers from schizophrenia, was sectioned for 5 months because his antipsychotic medication ran out due to Brexit supply chain issues. His doctor tells me there is no guarantee that this won't happen again. And that is arguably not the most serious story that's already come into the studio in response to a question about drug shortages, in which Brexit is a key factor, but not the sole cause, but drug shortages becoming the new normal in Brexit Britain. Billy's in Birmingham. Billy, what's going on?
Hi, James. Lovely to speak to you. I work in occupational health. I'm a physiotherapist by trade, if you like.
Yes.
And we deal with people who are off work, in what you might know as absenteeism, and also people who are in work, but they're not quite working as they could because of a health complaints. That's what we call presenteeism.
Yes.
And recently I've seen a huge increase in the number of people, patients who are reporting that they can't go back to work because their symptoms have deteriorated so much because of a lack of medication that they've always historically had. Now, when you put that on the backdrop of we have so many people on ill health sickness at the moment, you know, you hear lots of things about productivity issues in the country and, you know, get people back to work. And this is all massively intertwined with that. You know, in my industry, you learn a lot about the statistics and the facts. And there is quite a body of evidence to suggest that if someone's off work for 6 months on a medical complaint or issue, then the chances of them going back to work ever are reduced by about 50%. So if the reason for that is a medication backlog, then that's something in my eyes which is completely unacceptable.
Every newspaper, every right-wing newspaper for the last few weeks, every few days, been running a story about that. Running a story about the numbers of people, the number of people not working, rocketing. And I don't think I've once read a reference to what you've just described.
Yeah, well, the field that I work in is very niche. It's it's a very small community, occupational health. But
this is going to hold true across a much broader cross-section of people who can't work for health reasons, the people I'm reading about with the nudge, nudge, wink, wink between the lines suggestion that they're all swinging the lead or skiving or choosing to live a life of indolence. They've probably got flat screen televisions and a Sky subscription and Tenant Super on tap. That not once have I read that the failure of this government to address supply chain issues for medication will have contributed, and neither of us can measure how much.
Absolutely.
But will have contributed to precisely the phenomenon which, and I think it's here. You're not going to believe this, Billy. People think I exaggerate. The front page of today's Daily Express, pages 6 and 7. Sick note Britain to get even worse. Now, what are the odds if we turn to pages 6 and 7 of the Daily Express? Alarm as long-term sick list to top 3.7 million by 2040. What are the odds, if I were to bring myself to read this bilge from beginning to end, that the phenomenon you've mentioned and the phenomenon the Nuffield Trust identifies today in grisly detail, what are the odds that it gets mentioned at all?
Do you know what? I'll bet my house that it wouldn't. And do you know what? I'll bet your house as well.
Well, let's not get carried away, Billy. So... Oh, man, did you know that doesn't happen very often on the programme when I actually feel the sort of clouds clearing or a penny dropping as a caller. It's why I paid you the very rare compliment of hardly interrupting at all, because it's not going to explain everything. No one is suggesting for a minute.
No, absolutely.
But to cover sick note Britain, in quotes, without addressing what you've just described from the front line is delinquent. It's delinquent to the point of corrupt. So tell me, if you could, what it's like to I mean, you don't prescribe, I don't think, as a physiotherapist.
No, I don't prescribe myself. But sometimes the answer is staring you in the face.
Right.
And it's, these aren't new medications that, need to go through further testing. These are things that have been used for years, and these patients have had access to them, blip-free for years. And now suddenly the impact that it's having on them isn't just that they're in pain. It's not just that their blood sugars are a little bit up and down. It's actually absolutely debilitating. And you're absolutely right in suggesting that it's not the only problem.
No, of course.
And but I think from what I see, it is a growing problem. And like you said, I've never seen it mentioned in the conversation.
Well, let's pay attention. Let's make sure we pay attention to future conversations conducted elsewhere and see whether or not anybody ever banging on about sick note Britain or I know some people are ill, but lots of them probably aren't, as ever anyone looks at, especially if they voted for Brexit or if, God forbid, they're in a position of influence and encouraged other people to vote for Brexit. The reason why these conversations can't be conducted is because of the fundamental dishonesty and disingenuousness of people who aren't yet prepared to admit that they have helped cause these problems. Billy, thank you, mate. Good Lord. I wonder how many other people saw that rabbit when I did, just as he started talking and then detailing it. And as soon as he started talking about people who are unable to work for health reasons and the health reasons exacerbated and the return to work delayed or possibly even removed from the equation entirely as a consequence of the medication shortages, the supply chain shortages. I just saw it come into focus. It was mad, that. Mark's in Bangor in North Wales. Mark, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning. So myself and my wife adopted our nephew quite a few years ago now.
Okay.
And through the process, he had a diagnosis of ADHD and autism.
Right.
He functions very well. He's very intelligent. And seeing the community paediatrician, they started him on a drug which many people would know as Ritalin. And it started to have a positive impact on his schoolwork. Academically, he's doing very well. And recently, we've had absolute nightmares trying to get hold of this particular drug.
Ritalin?
Yeah.
Do you know, it's not that long ago that the usual suspects were banging on about how they were giving it out like Smarties. The same people who are silent now about the supply chain issues affecting the disability benefits or sick note Britain are the same people that 10 minutes ago were telling me that they were dishing out Ritalin like opal fruit. It's amazing, isn't it? So how does it affect you? Sorry, I'll try and park my politics for a minute, Mark, and you talk to me about the reality of your nephew's or your son. Did you call him your son or your nephew now that you've adopted him?
He's a nephew, son. Yeah, I slip between the two.
Boy, my boy. How's it affecting? What's the reality of this situation?
So the reality is, quite recently, we had to stop him taking the medication at the weekends to make it last.
Rationing?
Yeah, so the effect really is it does affect him, but he becomes quite unpleasant. He's difficult to live with sometimes, and that has a huge effect on the rest of the kids in the house and myself and my wife. And you know, a weekend can be absolute hell, and we know it's working because the school reports and everything are saying that he's really doing much better. He's just sat through mocks, which we didn't think he'd ever be able to sit in a room and do an exam, and he's just done it, and he sailed through it. So, you know, it's so important to him, but it's so important to us as a family as well. And to go around from pharmacy to pharmacy to pharmacy with a script and saying it's not in stock, try somewhere else. It's a controlled drug, so the prescriptions have an expiry on them. You can't hang on to them for too long. So you really have to get your finger out and whiz around and try and find someone who can get the supply in. And
of course, I mean, if there was an alternative medication or something like that, then you've got to get on the GP appointment, merry-go-round, haven't you?
That's an online consultation. Can you change it to a generic?
Yeah.
And again, it's a controlled drug. And then heaven forbid that the dose is changed, which it often is when we see the paediatrician who says, right, it's safe to go to the next dose. Then, you know, it's another whole...
So you prioritise his self-regulation at school over his self-regulation at home. You've been forced into a position where you have to choose the environment in which he's going to struggle to regulate himself. And I want you to tell, because I know a bit about this through some of my godchildren actually, but other people don't. What's it like for him when he comes down from a moment, when he comes down from a loss of control, and when he is capable of processing the consequences of what you've just described as being difficult to live with? What's that like for him, Mark?
It's really hard, and I think it's almost like a shame thing. Yeah. And he's been through quite a bit of trauma anyway. I mean, that's his whole backstory. But yes. You know, when you can sit him down, and often a car journey is the best time to chat with him.
Yeah.
He does have insight into it, but it's at the time, you know, he's so in a heightened state, he's completely oblivious. And then for us, you know, it can take us 45 minutes just to get back to feeling, you know, that you can have a rational discussion with him.
No, you've got adrenaline pumping through your veins as well at the time.
Absolutely.
The whole fight or flight response, there's nothing you can do about that. And safety issues, worrying about other children's safety, worrying about his safety, worrying about your safety sometimes, I imagine.
Yeah.
Oh, mate. And that's it. Yeah. So Friday nights or whatever it is, you find yourself thinking, well, we can't give him any tomorrow, so batten down the hatches, strap in.
That's it. It's just trying to stretch out the prescription, you know.
Doing a beautiful thing, Mark, looking after him. You really are. I don't know the details, and I don't want to pry, but, you know, you didn't have to step up to that plate, and it's a beautiful thing that you did.
Thank you.
You take it easy, yeah?
Yeah, cheers. Thanks a lot.
10:46. It is 10 minutes to 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean, it's not quite, Philip suggests that all of this came up in Operation Yellowhammer, which is true. Operation Yellowhammer looked at what would happen if the UK left the EU without a deal. A hard Irish border and shortages of food and medicine were among its findings, completely ignored, really, by government. Of course, we technically didn't leave the EU without a deal. There was a deal. It was that oven-ready deal negotiated by David Frost that they all tried to disown before the ink was even dry on it. But some of the consequences of such a rubbish deal are to be found in Operation Yellowhammer, and there it is in black and white in August of 2019. The UK will face a 3-month meltdown at its ports, a hard Irish border, and shortages of food and medicine if it leaves the EU without a deal. I don't suppose at the time anybody thought it worthwhile adding brackets or with a rubbish deal negotiated by a buffoon like David Frost and signed by the human blancmange Boris Johnson, close brackets. And of course, a big part of why this all went unrealised or understood or misrepresented or lied about was Rupert Murdoch's newspapers, which is why we follow the attempts of people like Hugh Grant and Prince Harry and Baroness Lawrence and others to hold Rupert Murdoch's newspapers to account for alleged egregiousness, alleged offences that are often filed under phone hacking but involve so much more. It's why we follow these events so closely, and it's why we are free, unlike much of the media in this country, to report them in as much detail and as lavishly as we please. 10:51 is the time, and it was Hugh Grant's turn yesterday to reveal that he has... Well, I'll tell you what, I'll find out what words Dr. Evan Harris uses. He is, as you know, a former director of Hacked Off, and a consultant to the claimant's legal team in the News Group litigation. I was going to use the word forced or compelled to describe, having read Hugh's lengthy thread about what happened yesterday. He I think that's a fair word, isn't it, Evan? He feels forced to accept a huge financial settlement from News Group.
Yes, because quite clear someone in his position, given his history of campaigning on this and putting it firmly above the parapet to be shot at by Rupert Murdoch's newspapers and their allies in the media, wouldn't be shy otherwise of going to court and having his day in court and taking his chances on proving his case. But as he set out in his statement yesterday, the rules of court, the cost rules, which are there to prevent court time being used when you can get the remedy, means that if they offer an amount of money that he simply can't beat in court, then the rules require him to be liable for his own side's costs, which otherwise he wouldn't be liable for, and News Group's costs, and I suspect their lawyers are rather more expensive than Hugh Grant's lawyers, from the point at which the offer was made until the end of the trial. And that's been estimated, he says, to be £10 million, and I don't think that's far off. And although he's a wealthy man, he's clearly not as wealthy as Rupert Murdoch, who can offer him and others what's said to be £1 billion altogether to avoid the cost of this £10 million trial. So, yes, he with regret, he said in his statement, he has to take the money, which he says he'll give to charity, and not pay Rupert Murdoch $10 million.
Because
that would be an odd outcome.
Well, because if the judge hands down damages that are 1 penny less than the offer that was made to the to Hugh Grant in this case, then the person bringing the case, what's the right word? Is it plaintiff?
Claimant.
Then the claimant, as you say, is on the hook for the entire cost of the entire trial, and you know that would involve the most expensive and costs. So that would be the most expensive lawyers in the world and costs. So, I mean, there's a logic to it, isn't there? In that it means that you get the result without having to expend the court time and energy. But of course, crucially, and this is the bit that the man in the street, and to be fair, Evan Harris, the man in this studio, struggles to get his head around, is if it was you, if you were the claimant and I was the accused and I gave you 10 million quid to go away in order to essentially avoid going to court, there's no admission of guilt or responsibility.
Yes, there's two. So firstly, in any individual case, I'm not going to argue against the rule that says if you can get justice without using court time and the resources of the court, then you should. And of course, it curtails the case so lawyers get paid less. And so generally, it's a good idea to have a way of ensuring that settlement can be reached. But here you've got to look at the bigger picture, because there have been, and this is public domain knowledge, at least 1,600 settlements, at least 1,600 settlements of this type, which, according to people who've looked at the accounts of News Corp and News UK, which publishes The Sun now, has cost upwards of £1 billion. That's £1,000 million in order, news groups say, to avoid the costs of a trial, which is 10 million. So they could have paid for, on my rough calculations, 100 trials that which they say they want to avoid the cost of by reaching a settlement, because they put out a statement yesterday and they said both sides felt that it would be in their commercial interests not to take this to trial. But I don't think that's true. It's certainly true for Hugh Grant, but it's not in the interests more generally of Rupert Murdoch, I believe, to have these cases tested, because all he has to do, because he's made complete denials of anything to do with The Sun being illegal, and Hugh Grant's claim, because he'd sued the News of the World earlier, is only to do with The Sun. So he could have, for £10 million, Mr. Murdoch, had a trial, found that his defence was correct, there was no illegality at the Sun. He wouldn't have had to pay that 10 million because the claimant would have lost entirely, right?
Yes.
Not beaten an offer, but lost entirely. And then he wouldn't have had to pay this £1 billion. Now, he's a businessman. He must have reasons for not wanting a trial of these issues. And I don't think it takes a great deal of thought to work out why he doesn't want this a judge's ruling on this and witnesses coming to court.
Apropos nothing in particular, I've often read columnists in Murdoch titles suggesting that if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear when it comes to investigation and scrutiny.
Are you suggesting there's hypocrisy in the...
Heaven forfend, Dr. Evan Harris. Heaven forfend, clutch away. And I suppose the question now, or the focus now, turns to Prince Harry, doesn't it? Who was involved in this case, I think, and who is potentially going to be put into a similar position.
Yes, that is true. There's not much I can say about an individual claimant because it's his business. But obviously he's gone on the record on an ITV interview saying he doesn't intend to settle. Whatever we can speculate about his wealth and income, it's not the billions that the owner of Fox and the erstwhile owner of 20th Century Fox has. That's clearly not the case. There is a mismatch, and it does mean I think there's a. Sorry
to interrupt, but I don't want to run out of time. So, because Elton John, of course, is still in the mix as well. So until
for the Daily Mail,
for the Daily Mail, but until which of course this Part 26 will apply to any case, any.
There's two.
Hang on, let me interrupt you before you interrupt me. So, until someone comes along, and as you say, Hugh Grant's a hugely successful actor, one of the most successful actors of his and indeed any generation. But to just put £10 million on the table, even if he can afford it, is I mean, it's going to stick in his craw. He'll win and have to put £10 million on the table. I mean, you don't need me to explain.
Not just on the table, give it to Rupert
to hand
Murdoch.
it over, to give it to Rupert Murdoch. So until someone comes along who is either mad enough or rich enough to think, do you know what, I am actually going to spend to get to what I believe to be the truth. I am prepared to give the people that have abused me millions and millions and millions of pounds. Until you get to that point, this is never going to be tried in court.
It does mean, yes, that wealthy corporations or indeed very wealthy individuals can buy their way out of ever having a court determination of a civil claim. That is the case, and that is the case here. Now, with the Daily Mail, it's slightly different because their denials have been so vitriolic that it would be the biggest climb down since the descent of Everest for them to ever say we're going to settle with even without admissions of liability, because they've been pungently rude about, if you look at what they've said about the claims of Baroness Lawrence, Prince Harry, Elton John, and others. I've never seen, and I've seen a lot of these, such strong denials and how this is an outrageous case. And for them to U-turn and start making offers would be the biggest climb down, as I say, in legal history.
That's a really good point. I
wouldn't put it past them.
No, I wouldn't put anything past them. But at what point, when does that push become shove, just in terms of the legal timetables?
A while yet, because we're still awaiting the defences to the particulars of claim, to the claimant's allegations, and then there has to be a discovery stage, and a trial won't be set until some months, or if not 18 months away. We're in
watching
early
this.
days.
Well, we'll be speaking again before then. I don't doubt it for a minute. And you probably won't answer this question, but I'll ask anyway. What sort of mood was Hugh Grant in yesterday when you spoke to him? Was he sanguine? I think he saw the writing on the wall for this, perhaps.
Yes, I mean, as he said, he was frustrated because he doesn't want people to think that he would shy at a low hurdle, but he shies at giving £10 million to Rupert Murdoch. And he has said that he will continue to campaign to ensure that justice is done. He just can't do it through this particular claim himself. But he's not the only player, as you've said, And
this ain't over yet. The fat lady has barely drawn breath at this point.
The cliche has not sung, yes.
Dr. Evan Harris, former director of Hacked Off, consultant to the claimant's legal team in the News Group litigation. And if you wonder why you don't read much about this sort of thing or hear much about this on other radio programs or television programs, what Evan said at the beginning of that interview about Rupert Murdoch's empires and his allies elsewhere in the media, or just people who are frightened of him, is a large part of the solution to your confusion. Quick text. I read this, and I actually brought. If you send me polite criticism, it will work in a way that rude criticism never will. So I read this. It said, "Dear James, I'm a regular listener, and I usually enjoy your show. I'm not enjoying it as much this morning." And I looked at that and I thought, well, why? I think the show's been really good today. This was particularly funny at the top in my own humble. And then I read, P.S. I'm not the Mark Menzies that you've been talking about. Yeah, fair enough. I think if it was another James O'Brien that had found himself making phone calls in the dead of night, claiming that he was being held hostage in very insalubrious circumstances, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed listening to that quite as much as I enjoyed talking about it. 2 minutes after 11 is the time. I had a message from Stan. Stan's been in touch. He says, James, please can you help urgently? I've been locked in a room by some bad people, and I need $5,000 to give to them. Can you get a courier to drop it off, please? What are the rules, Ofcom-wise, on this? Cause I'm a bit worried about old Stan there. Sounds like it might be a life and death situation. Can we crowdfund for this sort of thing? Can we do a whip round, get $5,000 round to stay? He's been held in a room by some bad people. At least he's not an MP. I feel duty-bound, actually, to continue with the conversation about drug shortages, not least because Mark's story was so powerful and Sophie's story was so horrifying, but also because I think technically we only did about 8 minutes of traditional phoning in the last hour, and it is a story that deserves attention. I know there's an element of self-congratulation when we talk about how other people ignore stories involving Murdoch's empire. But there's also an element of self-congratulation when we talk about how other outlets ignore stories that cast Brexit in an honest light. But it's important, isn't it? This is doubly important, this story. It's important because you are struggling to get hold of medications that you didn't used to struggle to get hold of. And it's important because we need together to work out how you have these conversations in a way that, how do you break the Brexit spell? So you will be listening to this, if you still listen, and there is a degree of masochism involved in some radio consumption. But your gut reaction, I shall tell you, I use social media rather than calls these days, but you'll get a response to the headline, Brexit seen as a factor as UK drug shortages become new normal. Someone will respond. I guarantee, you can go and have a look now at my Twitter. I haven't checked, but I bet my house, actually no, I bet someone else's house on it. Someone will say, oh, it's The Guardian. You can't believe what's in The Guardian. And you look at the article and it quotes the Epilepsy Foundation. It quotes an expert in drugs and drugs industry at Liverpool University. It is research conducted by the Nuffield Trust, an independent body of experts. It quotes authority after authority after authority. It quotes the Royal Pharmaceutical Society. Everywhere you turn, there are experts being quoted. But if you have had your brain boiled by Brexit, you will respond by going, oh, well, that's in The Guardian. And I don't know how to break that spell. And I think it's really important that we keep trying. How do I break that spell? You are determined not to believe that something is true. So you will reach for anything to protect your own shame, to protect yourself from the sense of shame that you will feel when you are forced to acknowledge just how conned you were by people like Nigel Farage and Jacob Rees-Mogg and David Davis and Andrea Leadsom and the rest of them, and of course Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings and Michael Gove and all the rest of them. How do you do it? Because you're going to do it. I'm not going to check, but you've done it already. Oh, it's in The Guardian. You can't trust them. So how do you do it? I don't know. But I'll take calls on that as well. 0345 6060973. But I just to reset this conversation. Patients, doctors, pharmacists, nurses, healthcare professionals. The most fundamental tenets of healthcare in this country have been corrupted by a decision to become the first human population in history to impose economic sanctions on itself. You are suffering. You are suffering medically. You consult a medical professional. The medical professional draws upon their expertise to provide you with treatment. The treatment is dependent upon a supply chain that, until 2016, was operating close to perfectly. A story about a seriously ill person being unable to access medication because of supply chain issues, I don't think appeared. It barely appeared prior to 2016. Now it's been described as, quotes, the new normal, end quotes. In a normal country, this would be the biggest story in town. It would be even bigger than the Tory MP phoning a 78-year-old constituency worker in the dead of night and asking her to send thousands of pounds to help him flee the clutches of some very bad people. It would be, in a normal country, an even bigger story than the deputy leader of the Labour Party having possibly omitted to pay £1,500 in capital gains tax on the sale of a house 10 years ago. It would be just think about it for a minute. If the government was responsible, if government policy, if an idea supported by every single member of this government had been proven to be responsible for a schizophrenic patient being sectioned because he couldn't get his medication, then the country would be in uproar, or at least the media would be united in its condemnation of those politicians. Every single one of them, even the ones that were just about bright enough not to vote for it, like Grant Shapps, every single one of them is prevented from telling the truth about a story that sees a little lad with ADHD being told after what clearly was an incredibly difficult start in life, being told that the medicine that helps him not get into trouble, the medicine that helps him not do things that he regrets shortly afterwards and then feels shame about for the rest of the day. You can't have it on weekends, son, because we've run out. The epileptic who is driving around pharmacies terrified that they're not going to find the drugs that they need to ensure that they don't suffer from seizures. The diabetic who is worried about the insulin running out. I've got all these messages coming in. And while there may be problems absent of Brexit, we are living in a country where the government is responsible for one of the major factors behind citizens being unable to access essential Just think about this for a minute. This is what I mean about having to wean myself off caution. Having to think, well, why are we still getting so angry about it? Just think about it. The Secretary of State for Health is part of a government that insists that this is all a good idea, that this was all worth doing. Part of a community of politicians that responded to warnings about what Brexit might do to medicine supply chains by calling it Project Fear and telling everybody else to shut up. Supported by voters who may now be struggling to get their own medications, but who 7 years ago were probably claiming that they didn't need insulin because they'd be able to treat their diabetes with Remainer tears. We can't let this go. There are days when I'd like to. I've told you before, I see Brexit in a headline now. I don't know when it happened. I used to see Brexit in a headline and I'd start rubbing my hands with glee. Open up the phone lines, we're going in. I see Brexit in a headline now and there is a little bit of me that just goes, oh, come on, can't someone else do it? Can't some of the people on this radio station who told you to vote for it start telling the truth about what's actually happened? Wouldn't that be nice? You know? Maybe spend 10% of the time you spend pretending that Angela Rayner has done something heinous to actually talk about the role you played in preventing diabetics from accessing insulin or preventing children with ADHD from accessing Ritalin. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be news? Wouldn't that be current affairs? Wouldn't that be straight talking? But no. Still this tiny, tiny, tiny little constituency of people operating almost exclusively on social media, and The Guardian, drawing attention to something that in any normal country would be a national emergency. A national emergency. And there it is. There you go. Sue's been watching Channel 5. God knows why. There should be a prescription for that, Sue. I've just watched Anne Widdecombe on Channel 5 saying that Brexit has nothing to do with the medicine shortage. I'm collecting my prescription later, and I wonder if it will be all right. Vicky's listening. I worked for a global manufacturer in 2016. I tried to explain to my Brexit voting friends that manufacturers will not prioritise markets where they don't make as much profit or where trade is more difficult to carry out. I was ignored in my 70% Brexit voting town, and now here we are. Jennifer, who contacts me regularly, but whose messages I don't read out as often as I perhaps should, has suffered from strokes recently. She's had 5 strokes since January. If I can't get my anticoagulants, I'm dead, James. No suggestion at the moment that anticoagulants are one of the affected supplies, but who knows until you start addressing it. She's 38 years old. And we did this to ourselves. That's why it's not talked about, because you can't talk about it without smashing your head against a metaphorical brick wall with the remembering that it's self-inflicted. So that headline there, Brexit blamed as UK drug shortages put lives at risk, actually would be Prime Minister, Chancellor of the Exchequer, Secretary of State for Health, Secretary of State for Defence, Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Every single member of this government remains committed to a cause which has created this situation. And you think I use the words or the phrase client media too much or unfairly. This should not be happening and would not be happening in a country where journalists, never mind politicians, told you the truth about their idiotic support for the stupidest thing that any country has ever voted to do to itself. It's 16 minutes after 11. I'm not going to mention politics again. All right, Mayor of London is joining us at 11:45 with news about the campaign. Not mentioning politics between now and then, all right? Because I just want to talk about medicines, and I want you to talk to me. Give me a ring, 0345 6060 973. What's actually happening to you? And I won't mention the politics. I needed to get that off my chest because it's like a blockage. That's why I can't talk about the medicines the reluctance to talk about it, because do I want to go off on another mad rant about Brexit? No. Do I have to go out on another yes, because of what it's doing to you and to yours. So you're a patient, you're a doctor, you're a nurse, you're a healthcare professional, and you can tell the rest of us the reality of UK drug shortages putting health and even lives at risk. 0345 6060 973. 20 past 11. Keith, we need a little alarm. I don't want to say the B word again. I just want to listen now till at least 11:45. And then, of course, at 12 o'clock, Mystery Hour. Maheen is in Slough. Sorry to keep you, Maheen. I know you're very busy, and I wasn't expecting to go off on quite such a furious tangent, but here we are. Better late than never. What would you like to say?
Hi, James. First-time caller, but what you've been talking about has really struck a chord with me.
Go on.
So I'm a GP, and basically we have been having this problem for ages now where patients are not getting their medications. And they're coming to us, they're taking up appointments because they're not able to get a medication. We're prescribing an alternative. They're coming back to us using another appointment because the alternative is giving them side effects. Then they're phoning again. So we're getting multiple contacts from them. So this is just like Billy was saying, like your other callers have been saying, it's having a wider impact on the whole, not only the family unit, their school attendance, sick leave, but also taking up appointments as well. And it's very frustrating. Which means that
the queue gets longer for people who need to who would be seeing you in normal times for more normal reasons, as in problems not caused by shortages. And how often can you help? I mean, you don't know, sitting in your surgery in Slough, you don't know what's in stock at Boots, do you? Or what's in stock?
Exactly, you're 100% right. So luckily, I'm in a practice where we have clinical pharmacists. Right. So they normally are aware of what's next available. But if you're in a practice, if you're in a rural practice with no clinical pharmacist, you're having to do this off your own back. So taking up time to find what's next available, emailing the specialist or writing them a letter, phoning around pharmacies. I actually did that just the other week. I phoned around pharmacies myself because I had an epileptic patient who we couldn't get the medications for. He has severe learning disabilities, and his parents were really struggling to manage him and his fits. And his medication was not in stock, and it's been amazing. He's been seizure-free for 7 years with this medication, and now it's out of stock. So then I prescribed an alternative, but then it started to give him side effects. His behaviour's not great. He's not sleeping.
So he's back in front of you. He's back in front of you, and the waiting list gets longer.
Yeah, exactly. And I just said you have to weigh up the benefits, with the side effects. And if he's not having seizures, then that is,
that's a huge plus.
This medication, exactly.
What's that like for you? I mean, because is it called titration when you work out what medicine or dosage a patient needs, and you hit the sweet spot with a patient like him, and then you have to backtrack to a compromise.
Exactly, and with epileptic medications, there's different formulations. There's immediate release, prolonged release, and they all have different effects, and they all work differently. So this is the issue: is when a patient's been so stable on it, it's absolutely so frustrating that this is taking up so much of our time. Also, it's frustrating for the patient. Like, we really feel for them, but in 10 minutes, what can you do?
I feel for you, and I sense a sort of frustration's not quite the right word. We need a German word, don't we? A combination of frustration and resignation. It's like you're really frustrated, but there's no point being frustrated because it's not actually going to change anything. And I presume today you had a bit of a moment when you heard it coming out of your radio, because it's been your reality for ages, and yet...
Yeah, I was like, I have to call.
Yes, because it's not being recognised or talked about elsewhere. And every day I open up one newspaper and I'm reading about Sick Note Britain. I hadn't even thought about school absences.
Exactly.
All of these things could be linked to a failure to get hold of the medication that you need.
Exactly. Kids are not going to school when they're not getting these
because
medications.
They've not got
We're
their
being
ADHD.
asked to write them letters, and that's taking up more time.
Yeah.
And then exactly the whole issue with the sick leave, that is actually having a big impact as well, because, and yeah, you're right, it's not talked about, it's swept under the rug. People pretending it's not happening, but this is the reality that we're facing on a daily basis.
Well, thank you for doing what you do, and I can't imagine the frustration of knowing that by looking after that patient with care that they wouldn't need if the supply chains were operating properly, you can't then look after that patient over there who's presenting with problems in need of attention as quickly as you would like to. And just to be clear, I said I wasn't going to mention the B word, that these are global problems exacerbated by the B word. So, the government should be pushing harder and harder and harder towards getting it fixed. But it can't, because of the role that the B word plays. So even if you could blame it all on Ukraine or on COVID inflation, or I beg your pardon, or on inflation or on COVID or on global instability, then the government could get its finger out. But because a big exacerbating factor is their own policy, that the platform on which their entire administration, the last 3 governments have been built on, they can't do it. They have to pretend it's not there. They have to sweep it under the carpet, which is politics, until you recognise the demonisation of people who are off sick, the demonisation of children who aren't going to school, and ignore completely the role that failure to access medication plays in those processes. It won't explain all of them, but all of those phenomena will contain this reality. Maheen, thank you. Graham's in Southgate. Graham, what made you pick up the phone?
I've got epilepsy. I was able to manage it, probably once a month or two, because I lost my medication, and tablets are meant to slowly change to the next one. Because I wasn't able to go from one to the next instantly, it's affected my epilepsy. I used to have, like I said, one every other month or so.
You mean a seizure, I think, Graham?
A seizure, yeah. I get 4 or so a week.
This is because you're struggling to get hold of the medication, so you're rationing it more, or...
I've spoken to the GP. I've spoken to my shop.
Pharmacist.
And there's nothing. They said there's absolutely nothing. I've spoken to my epilepsy specialist.
Yes.
There's nothing. And it
so
scares me.
Yeah.
It scares me. I have to sleep. I have to have a shower before my wife goes to work.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to fall down the stairs. So I have to do that before she goes, and I live downstairs. And that's it. My son's got, diabetes, and he's lost a lot of his, drugs and stuff. And it's scarier.
And you're not, and you've tried and obviously you're not in a position, I don't think, to be bombing around the county trying to find a pharmacy that might have it in stock, if indeed such a pharmacy exists. And as Maheen, the previous doctor, explained, the prescriptions for epilepsy are complicated. There's a lot of very different things that can be used. Slow release, quick release is what Graham means when he talks about the tablet sort of seeing you through until the next one. Mate, I'm so sorry. I really am. And those numbers, I think, merit repetition. Is that you've gone from having a seizure every month or two to having 4 a week for the past 2 months. That's just not fair. 28 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The reality of it for both patients and doctors couldn't really be clearer, could it? Ian is in Corwin in Wales. Ian, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Good morning.
Hello, mate.
Yeah, but I think they've known about this for a long time, because when Brexit first happened, my eyesight went a bit funny on one eye, and I just thought it
Blimey,
was
I thought it affected me, Ian.
Yeah, well, I'd never wore glasses before, and I was nearly 60, so I had good, perfect eyesight.
Okay.
So I went to a well-known glass provider, and they said I had a bleed behind my eye and to go to the hospital right away.
Okay, gosh.
So I went to the local hospital, and they said I needed a steroid injection directly into my eye to prevent what was happening, but they didn't have any because of Brexit. This was a direct quote from the doctor. Because of Brexit, the steroids we use come from the island of Ireland or France, and prioritising other medicines. So we've got none. We will call you back when we get it in. So, okay, I lived with the problem for about 3-4 months. They called me back, and when I went back,
then they got you in.
Oh, yeah, and then they called me in, and then when they called me in for the injection, they lovely and politely told me it's too late now. You need an injection.
So you've lost the sight in one eye.
I've lost my eye. So and the response from the team was, well, at least you've got one good eye.
No, they never said that. They never said that. No, you made that up. They never. At least you've got the other one. It's not. I mean, crikey. Or at least if they did, then they'd obviously clock the fact that you're a fellow with a great sense of humour. But you'd need one, wouldn't you? That's just grim. That is just grim. Ian, I'm sorry, but thank you for your call. 11:30 is the time. Amelia Cox is there with your headlines. 33 minutes after 11 is the time. That story about Mark Menzies has got legs. There's more to it than has already been reported, but we will find out. Samantha writes, please, James, tell this gentleman it will get better. It's horrendous at first because your brain still reads from the blind eye and it feels like there's a black hole over your face which distracts you, but eventually your brain will rewire and it's much better. I had an eye stroke in 2016. It is 33 minutes after 11. Mador is in Hillingdon. Mador, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James.
Hello, mate.
First time I'm speaking to you, but I have spoken to Nick Ferrari in the past.
Well done.
Listen to your program very regularly. So
thank you.
I'm a pharmaceutical physician who's retired now. More than 30 years experience in the field.
Yes.
I used to do a lot of research for multinational companies. So I knew a monkey could have told you that Brexit would cause issues with the supply chain. Basically, most of the drug manufacturers have their manufacturing unit outside the UK.
Yeah.
So the minute you had Brexit and you put barriers there, you're going to have issues with the supply chain. I mean, we knew that the minute this came in, that you would have problems. And this is what you're saying now. It's basically the country putting sanctions on itself.
Well, I mean, there are problems elsewhere for global reasons, but it's like a magnifying glass, isn't it? It's you show me a problem, and Brexit is a magnifying glass. It will get bigger, or actually no, because it's an eat me potion in Alice in Wonderland. It will actually get bigger. What's it been like for you then, knowing? I mean, from your professional perspective, that this was going to happen. I suppose in a way it's nice to be out of the business. You don't have to deliver the news to people that you haven't got what they need in stock. It must have been quite a surreal experience to have the most prominent politicians in the country popping up every 10 minutes, claiming to know more about the industry you'd been in for decades than you did.
Yeah, I mean, you ask anybody in the industry, they'll tell you that this was expected. This was definitely expected. It's nothing, there's no rocket science behind this. If you put a barrier in the supply chain, you're going to fall short. I mean, it's not just medicines. I mean, go to the supermarket and you see lots of shelves empty.
Yeah.
Because there are issues about getting stuff from there.
Sure. So I'm sitting in Holland with my either my tomato company or my insulin production plant, and I'm looking at where it's easier to sell. I've got a finite amount of product to sell. Selling it into Birmingham used to be as easy as selling it into Amsterdam, but now it's much, much harder. So I'm going to send it all to Berlin or to Dieppe or to anywhere in the single market, because why wouldn't I?
It's common sense, isn't it? I mean, the thing is, the question for you, James, is one of your previous callers said he lost his eye because of a lack of medication.
Yeah.
And I know that there are several drugs that are not in the market. Personally as well, because I'm on medication, sometimes drugs aren't available. Sure. You can try alternatives, and sometimes even the alternatives are not available.
Yeah.
And so what happens, and who is to be held responsible if a patient dies because of a lack of medication? Who will be held responsible?
Well, it depends, doesn't it, how the information and whether the information gets out. I think the claim in the Nuffield Trust is that has probably already happened, or certainly that it's
I'm
it's
sure
feasible.
it has.
What does the light at the end of the tunnel look like? I mean, it's like everything else. Either we wave a magic wand and miraculously create our own production capacity, or we go back into the single market. I can't see option 3 really to improve this.
Well, your first alternative is impossible. That to put up a manufacturing plant, to manufacture at large scale that medicines are produced is not something you can do quickly. And, the only thing is try and get some sort of treaty going.
Yeah.
With, at least for medicine. These are essentials. You can do without a lot of other things, but you can't do without medicines that save your life. So no. I think at least get a treaty for, we have now some sort of understanding about research projects. Why can't we do the same thing for medicine? These are essentials. I mean, lift this sanction on medicine. This is what it is, basically. It's a sanction on medicine.
Well, that would be regulatory alignment, but I don't even think they'd agree to that necessarily. And I haven't heard much from the Labour Party yet about what improvements they might bring to this situation. So there's drawing on your experience and expertise, Madhur, there's no way, even as some of the global problems are ironed out, so the impacts of COVID and war in Ukraine will sort of ease, we're still going to be on a worse footing than other countries in the European Union, most obviously, because we can no longer do the frictionless, completely free trade.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, we did have separate regulatory agencies as well, but there was a lot of commonality between that. You could, submit a common dossier to all the regulators. But now you can't do that because of the separation. So, we need some sort of a treaty to align these things. And I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel.
No, well, I don't know.
If you do see it, James, like it's probably an incoming train.
I thought you were going to say, let me know. We'll all start running in the opposite direction. Thank you, Medor. Beatrice tells me there's no shortages at all in Italy. I know this for a fact. Well, again, Beatrice, I'll take your word for it. But I get another text from someone saying, actually, I'm in Italy. I can't get hold of my antihistamine. So I don't know. We haven't touched on HRT, have we? Which last time we talked about this, we only talked about it twice. And I probably didn't get zoned in on it quite as clearly as we have done today. But we haven't talked about HRT, not being able to get hold of HRT or the lengths that you're going to. Has that got better? Is that a very small and rare cause for optimism? Has the supply of hormone replacement therapy actually improved? Has that eased up? And that might possibly have some lessons about how other drugs might do that as well. 0345 6060 is the number if you can help me with that. I'm drawn to the Grant Shapps' increasingly desperate attempts to draw attention away from the travails of Mark Menzies and back towards the nothing burger involving Angela Rayner. I may have another little clip of that for you shortly, but I don't want to spoil you unduly. 20 minutes to 12 is the time. Nikki's in Halifax. Nikki, what would you like to say?
Hello again, James.
Hello.
My specialist subject, NHS. Now, I'm going to speak with two hats, really. First, as a patient. Now, I'm take a drug called Rapinarole, which it's used for Parkinson's, but also to treat severe restless leg syndrome. Right. Now, for those who don't know about it, it's basically you take it at night and I get these symptoms at night, and it's to describe it in layman's terms, it's like you head to your hips wants to go to sleep, but your legs want to go nightclubbing.
Okay.
So it's quite debilitating, and you've got a sudden urge to move, and you just can't. The symptom, it's like spiders crawling up your legs. That's the only way I can describe the actual sensation. And
how long have you had it?
I've had it for quite a long time. I've had it probably about maybe 6 years that I know about.
Okay. So it's not as severe as some of the other callers that we've had, but it's definitely life-changing. It's deeply debilitating.
It is, definitely, because the thing is, if over the past 12 months, I've had problems getting it from my local pharmacy where I live in Manchester. I've ended up having to travel the whole length and breadth of Greater Manchester to be able to find a pharmacy that's open late. And now we don't have that many pharmacies that are open late anymore. So that choice is actually narrowed down even more. And because I don't finish work until, say, 6 o'clock, I don't have a lot of options available.
And previously it was a piece of cake?
Yeah, I didn't have a problem. Now, the problem is that if I don't take this medication, I can't sleep. Right. Simple as that. Because with me working as a nurse, that scares me because obviously I'm making decisions for my patients.
You're going to be tired at work.
Exactly. And to go with the other hat, I'm actually a nurse prescriber.
Oh, yeah.
And I have patients in my kidney clinics who take medications for things like blood pressure, medications to be able to offload extra fluid that they would normally, when they go to the toilet, get rid of as urine. But if that is not able to... If you're not able to get rid of that, then that has a knock-on effect where they end up becoming short of breath and getting admitted to hospital. And if
the more we talk about this, the madder it becomes, because
it does.
I'm reading all about some of the end results of these problems without any mention of the contribution that this issue makes to those problems. I'm not suggesting for a minute that we can explain all the waiting lists and all the sickness, all the sick notes and all the children not going to school by pointing to a shortage of medicines. But my God, they must play a part in the story. And yet somehow we've ended up in a place where people try to make enormous capital out of the victims of these scenarios without actually looking at all of the causes.
Yeah.
It's madness. Who do you worry about most? Who are the hardest people to... I mean, when you're prescribing, who are the people...
Well, I had a lady recently who she was in so much pain because she had so much swelling to her legs because of the amount of fluid that she wasn't able to get rid of. And I'd seen her the first time, and then I brought her back in a week so we could titrate her medication. And she was in tears, absolutely in tears. Now, the thing that scares me about that particular, I guess if you could look at it as a scenario, is if, I wasn't able to help her. I mean, luckily I was able to, and the medication that I've prescribed was some of the common things that you would, like you get your initial medication that your pharmaceutical company develop, and then you get your smaller companies who are able to take on that license and you get them from different companies every time you get a script. So luckily, that's not too bad. But if it's something, I guess, like for epilepsy, etc., and there's a specific brand that works for these patients.
Well, we've already heard from the trade-off between the not being able to get the optimal medicine and having then to decide what's better, dealing with the side effects of the suboptimal medicine or watching an increased risk of seizure. Do you know? Thank you, Nikki. You take care of yourself. You remember I forgot the fella's name. What was the name of the caller who had a bleed behind the eye? And he clearly possessed of a very good sense of humour, suggesting that having lost the sight in one eye as a consequence of delays, Ian said that some of the people treating him said, "Don't worry, at least you've got another one." And I don't know whether you balked at that. I thought two things. God, that's a bit brutal. I hope that didn't actually happen. Or if it did, I hope it happened in the circumstances that Ian seemed to convey, that it would have been in an environment of levity and lightheartedness. What do you think the Department of Health and Social Care has said about these shortages? I think, I could be misreading this, but I think they've done the equivalent. They've essentially said, there's loads of medicines that are in good supply. So they've been presented with the research showing that shortages have become the new normal, the allegation or the accusation or the fact that these shortages are putting lives at risk, the description of it as a shocking development that few would have expected a decade ago by the lead author and the Nuffield Trust's Brexit programme lead, so the man charged with watching the effects in particular of Brexit. Being given a list of drugs, whether ADHD, type 2 diabetes, epilepsy, HRT, although that seems to have improved since the last time we spoke about it. Being given a list of all the areas in which these shortages are acute and even dangerous. And the Department of Health and Social Care has responded by saying there are around 14,000 licensed medicines and the overwhelming majority are in good supply. So if you really need diabetes medicine, right, to the point of desperation, and you can't get it, don't worry, because we've got absolutely loads of blood pressure tablets. That's what the Department of Health and Social... I'm not misreading this, am I? They're saying, we've got 14,000 medicines, the overwhelming majority are in good supply. So I can't get any epilepsy treatment, but don't worry, because we've got loads of Fisherman's Friends. I know that Fisherman's Friends aren't actually a prescription medicine, but sometimes you read things and you think the problem must be with you. I must be missing this. I'll tell you, the last time I noticed that was when Evan Davis was interviewing Laura Trott on the PM programme on Radio 4. I've written this up. The paperback comes out a week today, actually. I should have mentioned that sooner. I've written this up for the paperback because I listened back to it 2 or 3 times when Laura Trott, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, revealed that she didn't know what percentages were, or certainly had no idea what the relationship between GDP and debt was. Inevitably, under Rishi Sunak, she's still in the job. But listening back to it, Evan, who I think is a superb journalist, he did that thing that we do sometimes, where he thought, well, hang on a minute, this is so mad, it must be me. You can hear it in his voice, where he goes, no, debt's gone up. And you've got the Chief Secretary to the Treasury sitting in a studio going, debt's come down. And he's looking at the numbers. You can hear him going, I must have got this wrong. Because there's no way a Chief Secretary to the Treasury would be sitting in the studio saying the stuff that I think she's saying. But she was, and you hear the penny drop with him and the increased confidence that no, it's actually the Chief Secretary to the Treasury who doesn't understand the relationship between GDP and debt. This is a bit similar. Is the Department of Health and Social Care really responding to news that diabetes medication, epilepsy medication, ADHD medication are in chronically, dangerously short supply by telling us, no, but there are lots of medications that aren't? Do you know what? I really think they are. It is just coming up to 10 to 12. 11:52 is the time. Do you know, you mentioned Laura Trott not understanding what GDP is, or at least the relationship between GDP and debt. And it turns out that she's been at it again.
Great news for people at home. We saw inflation coming down. Crucially, we saw food prices coming down. And this hasn't happened by accident. This has been a result of the government working very hard with the bank, with the Monetary Policy Committee, to make sure we've got these inflation rates coming down steadily now. Real wages are now rising, and people can have a little bit more money at the end of the month, and that's really good news.
Just to be clear, because I think you misspoke just then. When you said prices were coming down, did you mean prices are going up?
Sorry, the rate of which prices are rising are coming down.
So
inflation is coming down.
Food prices are still going up.
Yeah, I think our viewers find it. Could you just explain this to our
4% and not 5%?
So just explain this to our viewers. You say inflation is coming down, and people say to us, I know, but the prices of goods are going up. So just explain to our viewers how those two things can be true.
So real wages are rising and have been rising now for the last 8 months. And that's really important because it means more money in your paycheck at the end of the month. And that is looking at wage rises and then taking away the impact of inflation. So that is really important.
The prices are going up.
Prices are going up.
Prices are going up. So she begins that interview by saying that prices are coming down and ends it by saying that prices are going up. I suppose there's one other element of the conversation about medicine that we haven't touched on. And I'm very conscious of this. I always remember doing an NHS phone-in back in the day. And I think it was when sepsis was first in the news. And I got a message. It was a text, not a phone call, from an older lady. Because she told me her age. What is the age at which you start telling everyone your age? And I do it a bit on the radio for context so that you understand where I sit generationally on an issue like the smoking ban. But once you reach a certain age, you tell everyone your age all the time. He's like, I'm 86 years old and I'd like to talk about football. I don't know why that is, but I know that she was an older lady because she would have told me her age. And she said, I'm due to go into hospital this afternoon and now I don't want to because of what you've been saying about sepsis and stuff like that. And I'm always conscious of not wanting to frighten people. We're not going to have long, are we? But I believe the Labour mayoral candidate, Sadiq Khan, is on the line in Greenwich today for the launch of the mayoral manifesto. I suppose we should start with the headlines, Sadiq Khan. What are the big pledges that you're making in a bid for a third term?
Well, good morning. It's great to speak to your listeners about the election in 14 days' time. And what I've announced today, if I'm re-elected on May the 2nd, we'll be making universal free school meals permanent. Every mother on a maternity ward, when she leaves, will receive support from our baby bank, nappies, essentials, toiletries. We're going to be building 40,000 council homes by the end of this decade. We're going to end rough sleep. And we're also going to be invested in the police and in youth clubs. And the key choice Londoners have in 14 days' time is a mayor who will make free school meals permanent, or one that will end them. A mayor that will keep fares down, or one that will hike them up. A mayor that will invest in youth clubs, or one that will close them down. A mayor that will clean up our air, or one that wants to return to pollution. A mayor that unites our communities, or one that divides them. So it's a big choice Londoners have, and I think this will be the closest election in the mayoral history in London.
You've had 8 years to do all of these things.
Well, the real reason why this year is so exciting is it's what I call a moment of maximum opportunity.
Right, hang on. I want to know why you haven't done any of these things over the last 8 years.
We've made real progress in all these things. 7 months ago, I announced free school meals, first for 1 year, and then for 2 years, I can now announce I'll make them permanent if re-elected. 8 years ago, I began the process of freezing fares in our city. 5 of the last 8 years, they've been frozen. They're now frozen for the next year as well. I began the renaissance of council house building more than any time since the 1970s.
How many
But
will have
Angela
been built by the time the ballots open in 14 days' time under your mayoralty? How many between 2016 and 2024?
The number of genuine affordable homes that have been built is, roughly speaking, £70,000. 70,000 homes. We had a deal with the government for 116,000. We smashed that record. 23,000 council homes over the last few years. I'm promising 6,000 new rent control homes as well. But the really exciting prospect, as I said, was for the first time in a generation, a Labour mayor working with a Labour government will be transformative.
Your Conservative candidate, Susan Hall, has pointed out that, in a way, if my children were still at a state primary school, their lunches would be subsidised by people who earn considerably less than me. There is a form of natural injustice built into that, she suggests.
Yeah, well, listen, James, God forbid if you got run over by a car, even though you can afford to pay for your healthcare, you get treated by the A&E at the local NHS hospital. If, God forbid, tomorrow you are unwell, you could go to your GP and not pay for the privilege of doing so, the right to do so. I think universalism is really important. Look, I'm somebody who benefited from means-tested free school meals. I don't remember the meals. I remember the stigma and shame. I enjoy speaking to teachers who tell me that children's performance has increased hugely since they had a nutritious free school meal. Parents telling me about how, rather than falling out with the school because they're chasing up the fees for the meals, they're now getting on with the school. So free school meals doesn't just lead to parents having less stress, less anxiety, and it's been a lifeline to parents during the cost of living crisis. It's lead to better attendance, better productivity, but also a situation where you can sit cheek by jowl breaking bread with the child of somebody wealthier than you, which is really important.
Let's look at one of the other pledges. Rob Blackie, your Liberal Democrat rival, has picked a few holes, or thinks he's picked a few holes in your freeze fares pledge. It excludes daily and weekly contactless caps and travel cards, which are among the most popular ways for commuters, certainly, to get to and from work every day.
So 80% of those people who use public transport in London will get the benefit of the freeze. The reason why the remaining won't is because that's a deal done by the government with the privatised companies, what's called the TOCs. So when you buy a travel card, you don't just get the benefit of TfL services, you also get the benefit of the privatised TOCs. And the joy of a Labour government is, just like we can freeze fares on TfL, we'll be making sure those privatised companies also freeze their fares too.
I mean, freeze fares are all very well, but the experience of travelling on the London Underground is the worst that it's been in the nearly 30 years more than 30 years that I've lived in London. Nothing in your manifesto to sort of increase services or to improve the number of trains on the lines, or to address particularly the Central Line, which can be a bit of a nightmare at the best of times.
Well, I'm pleased to tell you that we'll not only be having £500,000 spent on refurbished Central Line trains, new trains on the DLR, new trains on the Piccadilly line, a new Baker Loop line going from Elephant and Castle to Lewisham. I'm announcing tomorrow a Superloop at 2. Fares being kept low, increasing frequency of buses across our city, millions of kilometres of new buses, particularly in outer London. Build on the progress we've had in the last 8 years, the Elizabeth Line, Northern Line extension, London Overground extension, but also making sure we continue to improve public transport, keep it affordable, accessible and safe.
I saw also that you've signed up, because I think you were invited to do so on this very programme, to the Reform Political Advertising's pledge to make every reasonable effort not to mislead voters. Just a word, if you would, on why you did that.
Well, listen, I want to thank the caller who rang in. I think the last time I was on Speak to I've seen over the last few weeks the consequences of lies, misinformation and disinformation. Videos purporting to be of a station in London, but lo and behold, they're a station in New York called Penn Station. Mocked up images of street signs, which aren't really street signs. They're basically mocked up images to scare people into voting for the Conservatives. I've seen the consequence of being dishonest and being disingenuous, and I'm not willing to do so.
Of course, Susan Hall, your Conservative candidate, is more than welcome to address those accusations with me on this programme at her convenience, and you will be with her and indeed Rob Blackie and Zoe Garbett of the Green Party at a hustings on Tuesday on Tom Swarbrick's programme at 5 p.m. Sadiq Khan, the Labour candidate for London Mayor, many thanks for your time. Remember, you can see a full list of candidates at lbc.co.uk/candidates. I'll say that again because it's really important and I get into trouble if I don't. You can see a full list of candidates at lbc.co.uk/candidates. I'm going to tell you a little secret. I was going to ask Sadiq Khan to contribute a question for Mystery Hour, and I thought that was quite a funny idea at 9 o'clock this morning when I came up with it. But as I sort of saw it on my note, and I just thought, that's going to sound really childish. You're 52 years old. When are you ever going to grow up? It's Mystery Hour next.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Mystery Hour with James O'Brien.
6 minutes after 12 is the time. I mean, this is almost Mystery Hour territory, but just to correct a couple of things I said earlier, the tale of Mark Menzies hiring a Brazilian sex worker who had been refused entry to the country on at least 3 separate occasions is not part of the new scandal. It turns out that this fella has been scandal adjacent now for some time. There's another story about the police being called when he had allegedly got a dog drunk and then engaging in a street brawl. He wasn't charged because he successfully persuaded police that he hadn't fed the dog alcohol, and he did this by showing them photographs of the person that he'd been fighting with feeding the dog alcohol instead. There is a book I'd recommend actually called The Decade in Tory, which really goes into encyclopedic detail about all these sort of things, and of course rather begs the question of why the party has sat on it, if you pardon the expression, for so long. But anyway, that's just one mystery that we won't be solving today. I mean that. Don't ring in and try and solve the mystery of why the Conservative politicians who've been pretending to care passionately about Angela Rayner's tax affairs from 10 years ago have been absolutely silent and only suspended this Mark Menzies fella over alleged misuse of funds when a journalist reported the story. They didn't do it when they found out about it. They did it when it got reported. So don't ring in about that, because it's Mystery Hour, okay? And I need to remind you what that means. It's building up a bit of tension. 2 things. The first is you can win a Mystery Hour board game. The most glittering prize in the history of British radio, it has been suggested. In fact, last week's winner posted a lovely photograph of himself with it, which warmed the cockles of my heart, actually. And you do that by being my favourite contributor of the week. It's no more complicated than that. And my decision is final, and the full terms and conditions are at lbc.co.uk. And the second thing you need to know is, and you can find your own Mystery Hour. If you don't win one, you can buy one at mysteryhour.co.uk. Which reminds me, I must remember to plug the paperback of my book, which comes out on Thursday, with a new chapter and indeed an index. And the index is I've never had anything as grown up as an index in my books before, but it means that, you know, when you're trying to find that little nugget of information about a politician getting a dog drunk or something like that, and you know you read it in my book, but you can't find, you can just go to the index, find it, and then lo and behold, you'll get all those little argument-winning items of evidence, nuggets of fact that we all love so much. But the second thing is, actually, there is no second thing, really. You're not supposed to repeat yourself, but there aren't really any other rules. And don't ring in with questions that we've already answered. I've done the T&Cs are at lbc.co.uk. I've already mentioned that. So we always used to think there were 2 things I had to mention at the top of Mystery Hour, but now I can only think of one. We usually forget the rest. You're not supposed to Google anything, but that's fairly obvious. No, we'll crack on. 9 after 12. Dane's in Stoke-on-Trent. Dane, question or answer?
Question, please, James.
Carry on.
Why is it that when long hair is tied up into a single piece, it's called a ponytail, but when it's tied into multiple pieces, it's called pigtail?
Because they're shorter.
But it doesn't look like a pig's tail, though, does it?
Well, it depends on the breed.
Well, I'm more sort of thinking it's like a singular plural thing. I've got a young daughter, and it occurred to me the other day that whenever we tie her hair back, we only ever use ponytail as a singular and pigtails as a plural.
So it would be as a plural. You can't have a single pigtail.
It doesn't feel like it. Doesn't seem.
So, what's the difference between a pigtail and a ponytail? Answer singular and plural.
Yeah, so why is it not ponytails? Because that doesn't feel right.
Ponytails. Pigtails. I mean, pigtails doesn't actually make much sense on any level, because as you've correctly pointed out, there's not much resemblance to a pig's tail, and because they're not curly. I mean, a pig's tail is curly, isn't it? If memory serves, or curly-ish.
Yeah. And ponytail does look like a horse's tail, but pigtails don't look like pigtails. And why is it why is the one?
There's a lovely question here. There's a lovely question. I'm not sure we've nailed it down yet, Dane.
Well, I'm thinking, why is ponytail singular and why is pigtails plural? Is what's occurred to me.
But that's a question that contains the answer, or an answer that contains the question, isn't it? I mean, because it's so no pig has two tails.
No,
it looks like a ponytail coming down the centre of the back of the head. I put it, yeah, all right. So but why? Why pigtails? This is how I'm going to do it, Dane. All right. I'm going to do it like this. Okay. Pigtails, ponytails. Why?
Keep it simple.
Yeah, exactly that. And I like that. So then they can answer whatever question they want, as long as it involves pigtails, ponytails. Why? Anthony's in Blackpool. Anthony, question or answer?
Yes, hi, James.
Hello, Anthony.
My question is, do cats retain memories of traumatic events?
Why'd you ask?
I asked this.
Yeah.
I asked this. I thought you might ask. I asked this because ours was at a cattery about a year ago.
Yeah.
And it went missing for 2 weeks.
From the cattery?
No, yeah, that's unfortunately. I won't go into detail.
No, weren't happy about that, were you?
And we haven't sent it back to the same cattery.
I'm surprised.
But it was in an alien environment. It was in a semi-rural area, quite a distance away from home, so it would have been very foreign to it.
Mm.
And we were fortunate enough to get it back.
How did you get it? How did you get it back?
Well, it had a blanket. There was a blanket that we used to have on the settee, which my dog would often lie on. And the dog is very good friends with this cat.
Oh, that's nice.
So the smells were on this blanket.
Yeah.
So the people at the cattery got hold of a trap.
Right.
Not, a cruel trap.
No, like a cage.
Obviously,
trap. Yeah.
We didn't want to add any.
Yeah, not a snare. Not a snare. I mean, not an illegal sort of. Sprang, got you. No, a trap. A trap.
It wouldn't have been great getting the cat back in that condition.
No, certainly not.
They
were in enough trouble as it is, Anthony.
That's right. We got the stay for free at least for the dog and 2 cats, but that was neither here nor there. It was very.
So
upsetting.
they put the blanket in the cage and it tempted the cat in.
Yeah.
So they knew the cat was around. The cat hadn't gone far. It hadn't tried to get home, for example.
Yeah. We've been searching around late at night.
Oh, I've been
apparently a cat's first thing is safety.
Yeah.
And if they hear people, and if they're rattling their favourite treats, they'll hide away.
Ours came out for one of my girls, Been missing ours came out for one of my girls. It'd been missing for about a week, and we got a report from not that far away, but it had been bonfire night when he went missing. So that there'd be trauma there.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
And so we took the cage with us, and we all were walking up the road, only about half a mile from where we live, but not on a route we normally go on. And my oldest, whose cat it is, was just calling him, and he came to her.
Oh, my word.
And we'd already, I'm not going to lie to you, Anthony, I'd given up hope, but I hadn't shared that. I hadn't shared that with the family at the time. Mrs. O'Brien, the optimist in our relationship, had been putting leaflets through letterboxes and all sorts of things and up on the local Facebook group. But I thought after a week, I thought that's it. But no, it came to her call, came to her voice.
Apparently, they can go missing for up to a year or more.
And still know what home is.
And then still be rediscovered, yeah.
It's amazing, isn't it? So what we want to... do you think there is evidence of trauma?
No, it's not apparent on the surface. I think the only difference in behaviour we've noticed, is that I think that he stays in a little bit more.
Well,
he still goes out, but it's not quite as adventurous.
It'd be quite scary, wouldn't it?
It's more of a home bird.
Yeah, but, nature, you don't have that refuge. It'd be like us, really. If we had to sleep rough, we'd probably be a bit traumatised by it. So I don't know, how will we know? How could we answer the question?
That's another question, isn't it? And, and that might be the answer, that we don't.
Oh, yeah. Cool, that's kind of a bit philosophical.
Fundamentally, my question is, does he retain any...
Does he know? Does he have like a form of feline PTSD?
Yeah, I mean, my dog remembers houses where he's gone past and he's been given a treat.
Yeah, no, ours does too. Gets a sniff in her nostrils and she'll go bonkers. I like that question. I like that a lot. Also, we've got. Well, it's lovely to speak to you. Our cats and dogs are friends as well. It's nice, that, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, one of them is one of the cats hisses at our dog when the dog's been to the groomers and had his hair trimmed.
Doesn't recognise him. Thinks there's a stranger. Thinks there's a cuckoo in the nest. Haven't got a cuckoo. Thank you, Anthony. It's 12:15.
Mystery Hour on LBC with James O'Brien. Call 0345 6060 973.
It is 17 minutes after 12. The cats retain trauma, and pigtails, ponytails, Why? Tony's in Chingford. Tony, question or answer?
It's question, James. Hello again. How are you?
Hello, Tony. Very well. What's the question?
I was reading a book by Bill Bryson last week, and there was a chapter in it about when the Pilgrims went to America, and they tried to get on really well with the Native American Indians in the tribes. But it turned out they couldn't communicate in the Indians' language because it was so harsh.
Right.
There was so few vowels language sounds in it. So I was wondering, what is the harshest, least vowely language in the world?
So like all sort of
Yeah. It was all
like
it was
Keop in Battle of the Planets.
Yeah, a bit Klingon-y.
Yes. So the least vowel sound. I mean, would anyone be able to answer that? Is it the kind of thing that linguists measure?
I don't know, actually. That's what I'm asking. I was wondering, it just struck me as they did actually find 2 Indians that could speak English, so there was all right after all. But
how did that happen?
Oh, well, one of the Indians, a guy called Somerset, was actually...
Somerset,
sorry.
Yeah.
He was actually taken as a slave, and he ended up spending 9 years in, I think it was Coventry or something, I don't know.
Good
anyway,
Lord, hadn't he suffered enough? And then he went back and still had the ability. I haven't read that book. I like Bill Bryson. I don't remember reading that one. I should try and find out for you. What was the other one called? The other one that could speak English? Somerset and Devon?
Satotwe or something. I'll pronounce that wrong.
That's all right. It's got too many vowels in it. Thank you, Tony. So we want the language with the least amount of vowels, please, on 0345 6060 973. Or vowel sounds, because the language concerned wouldn't actually have vowels in it, but what we would call a vowel sound. So if I speak French, if I say je parle français, there's lots of vowely sounds there, isn't there? Simon is in Ikaria in Greece. Kalimera. No, is it Kalimera? What time is it there?
Yeah, it's Kalimera. It's 20 past 2.
20 past 2. It's Kalispera then, almost.
Kalispera.
Kalispera. What's question or answer?
It's a question, James. How are you doing, by the way? You all right?
Can't complain, Simon. Etsy Ketsy.
Good man.
What have you got?
Yeah, Etsy Ketsy.
Etsy Ketsy.
Come see, come sa.
That's all the one.
So look, my question is this. I've often wondered about it. When Rangers and Celtic play, or the other way round, in Glasgow, why is it called the Old Firm Derby?
Good Lord, I should know that.
Well, I thought you might.
Yeah,
but you don't, do you?
No, I don't. You're absolutely right. Dexeron. Horis. Crikey. No, what the Old Firm? No, I was trying to say no idea then, but I forgot what idea was. I got the Horis bit. Right. That would be no, wouldn't it? I don't. But I forgot what idea was. Yeah, you're on. I like it.
Okay, you're there.
Right, yeah, no, Ferristop Pulley, Simon. Calo Taxidi.
Yeah. But see you soon, mate.
You will? Well, you won't, but it's a figure of speech. 21 minutes after. Well, you might. I mean, who knows? I get to Greece most summers, but not Ikaria. John's in Shepton Mallet. In Somerset. There's a slave named after that. Well, question or answer, John? Question or answer?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to sacrifice my question, but I could have answered the last question.
No,
I'll give you my question.
Go on then.
Yeah, my question is, when the interest rates of the Bank of England go up, in terms of, let's say, mortgages,
Yeah.
So when my mortgage, and I'll just use, easy figures here, £1,000.
Yeah.
And the Bank of England increased the interest rates.
Yeah.
And let's say, just to make it easy, it goes up to £1,500. Does my retail bank, let's say Barclays or Bank of Scotland or whoever it might be, have they instantly made a windfall of £500?
Say that again. Sorry, I got a bit distracted.
All right, okay. Forget about the Old Firm for a moment.
No, it wasn't that. Go on.
All right, okay.
It's this Mark Menzies story, John. People keep sending me new things about him, and I might close my screen and concentrate properly. Go on. What?
Right. Okay. Right. So when the Bank of England changed interest rates, so specifically, let's use mortgage. So if the mortgage is £1,000, and because of an interest rate rise, it goes up to £1,500. Have the retail
hang on, that's the bit where I got confused. Your mortgage doesn't go up to 50. You mean your payment?
Yeah. Sorry.
Right. So your monthly payment goes up because of the interest rates from 1,000 to 1,500.
Yep.
Yeah.
So has the retail bank, whoever you've got at West, Barclays or Bank of Scotland or whatever, have they instantly made a £500 additional profit?
No.
Why?
I'm not sure.
They were making a profit on £1,000. So why is the Bank of England changing their base rate, change the retail?
Because they are paying out more on the money that they are holding in savings as well.
Well, they aren't, because we know that it's not the same differential, is there?
No, it's not.
They're very slow to react on the savings aspect. But even if you took that into account, there's still a bigger differential between the two. And so therefore, is it a windfall tax? But
no, okay, I understand the question. I was embarrassed enough not to know what the old firm's all about. But so somebody somewhere just makes money when interest rates go up. It actually seems quite feasible.
Well, the bank or the shareholders or whoever, yeah.
Yeah, you're on.
I know they probably don't, and it's probably more...
no, it probably isn't. It probably isn't. That's the problem, isn't it? We think it's all complicated, and it isn't. Otherwise, how could Jacob Rees-Mogg make a ton of money in the financial markets?
There you go, exactly. But it's just that, from £1,000 to 500. What happened to that £500 that I'm now paying to Barclays or Bank of Scotland or whoever?
Yeah, great question. Cheers, John.
No worries.
12:24 is the time. Bob's in Kennington. Bob, question or answer?
Question.
Carry on.
How did ships that were sail-powered travel up the Thames to the docks?
Well, by sail power?
No, if there was no wind.
Well, you didn't say that, did you, Bob?
If there was no wind, on a calm day, from the estuary up to the St Catherine's docks, and likewise back again.
They'd have a few oars, wouldn't they?
No, but I'm talking, like.
They'd have a few. They'd have a few oars.
Do you think?
Yeah.
I wondered if it was tidal, but surely that
for
would
emergency. Well, if it's specifically the Thames, it might be tidal.
I am taught, specifically the Thames. But then, I imagine turning into...
But that's what I mean. There is no wind at all, and you need to set sail. But do you know, actually, Bob, we've both missed this, I think. No, I'm not. I'm not even joking. I think they wait for the wind, mate.
You could be waiting for weeks.
Well, that is why it was very hard to give an accurate time of arrival for sailing ships.
I suppose that says for departure as well, doesn't it? Yeah.
Well, you remember that I read a lot of fiction from sort of 17th century set crime fiction, and there's always someone who's invested his life savings in a slave ship, and then they're down at Bristol dock every day hoping it's going to turn up. They've got no way of knowing whether or not whether he's going to come back with his fortune or whether he's going to be in penury.
Right.
So you can't make any predictions based on wind accurately. So I mean, well, wait, I'm putting it on the board, but I think that we were thinking about it in very 21st century terms and presuming it has to set sail at 2:00. Otherwise, you're going to have to give all the passengers a refund.
Yeah.
But you'd wait for the wind. You'd wait for the wind to come up. I think I'm reading that in one of S.W. Perry's book recently, where the Italians, there's only a certain type of day where they can set sail, and it will be partly because of tides and partly because of wind. And if the wind doesn't turn up, then the tides don't matter.
Because, like, the Cutty Sark hasn't got holes for hawse, does it? Or,
no, I think let's pretend I never said that bit, if it's all right with you, with your permission.
Granted. Lovely. Thanks, James.
No, I love that question. Thank you, Bob. 12:26. How do the sailing boats get up and down the Thames if there isn't any wind? If indeed they do. Simon's in Littlehampton. Simon, question or answer?
Hello, James. It's a question for you.
Carry on, mate.
We were watching a fairly newish drama, 12, the other week, and there's a courtroom scene. I think it's set in New Zealand. And the courtroom scene with Sam Neill had...
I love him.
Yeah, superb. And the judges are wearing white wigs, which then made me ask, is the white wig a worldwide thing?
No.
And so why only the two countries then?
Well, it wouldn't be. It's probably other Commonwealth countries as well, no? I mean, I think it goes back to Charles II.
Right.
There's a lot of wigs around during the Restoration.
Because the wigs were meant to be as a disguise, weren't they? The judges didn't get recognised.
In the street, I think so. I'm pretty sure, because, I mean, we've watched some big cases in America, haven't we? And they don't wear wigs.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's the answer to your question. Is it worldwide? No, because there are plenty of countries where you don't wear a wig. But does it extend anywhere beyond the sort of reach of UK law, British law? I don't think it does. I think it's a peculiarly British thing.
Yeah.
Commonwealth. I'll put it on the board. Well, I'm tempted to take a round of applause for that one, just because of...
Well, I think you should.
I do
but
too.
I'm just wondering what other countries...
I might allow a steward's inquiry on it, but you know, qualifications. I was watching the O.J. Simpson trial the other day when the fella died, and they re-showed it, and he definitely had no wig on. Judge Judy doesn't wear a wig.
That's for sure.
I'll take it, but it may be improved subsequently by someone else. Thank you.
It'd be interesting to see what countries do.
Yeah, exactly that. If it does extend beyond the Commonwealth. Thank you, Simon. Ian's in Dorking. Ian, question or answer?
Hi, James. It's an answer about the cats, basically.
On. Yes.
I suppose widening his question, the question is, do cats hold grudges?
Yes.
Is an allied question, and they absolutely most certainly do.
Oh.
They certainly, it will depend on the cat's experiences in life, and if they've learned to be quite chilled out about the challenges that life throws at them, then things are obviously less likely to traumatise them. Some of them will be quite irrational in what they consider is a traumatic event.
Yes.
But we do, certainly in the cat world and in the veterinary world, we do kind of focus on trying to make cats' experiences of things like going to the vet as non-traumatic as possible, so that they want to go back next time, or they tolerate going back next time, as opposed to having a hissy fit about things.
Yeah,
really.
I mean, they're learning. That's learning, but it doesn't mean they're traumatised. It just means they remember not to trust that fellow over there with the massive net.
Yeah, fair point, James. I think I've certainly met a few that were permanently traumatised.
A scatty cat.
It's a scatty cat. It's a sliding scale, I suppose.
Yes, it is.
But,
so the
but
cat. So Anthony's cat on I mean, lost in the wilds of Lancashire, probably would have been a bit, like you said. He's less like, he goes out less now because he's frightened. Somewhere there's a memory of not knowing where he was and being all scared, and so he has been traumatised by that.
Yeah, they do. I mean, they do a lot of their learning in the first sort of 9 weeks of life as kittens, and they're very much hardwired at that point. But they will, by negative association, they will.
It's learned behaviour almost. I mean, it's actually. Were you listening last week?
I was, and I wasn't able. I've never been able to answer one of the cat questions.
There was one of our favourite questions last week. The first question last week was, why are pheasants so stupid? And in some ways, the answer is the same as yours about cats, because pheasants are bred for shooting. They don't get the chance to learn about danger. And in fact, if you're running a pheasant shoot, the last thing you want is a pheasant that understands danger, because they'll be flying off in the opposite direction at 100 miles an hour, not going anywhere near the guns. And they don't live. If a pheasant actually lives out one season, it will develop an ability to stay off roads, for example, or it becomes less likely to get run over. So in a way, it's the same answer, isn't it, to two very different questions?
And they're also, I mean, they aren't solely predators. They are mid-food chain. So
cats, of course.
Cats are prey animals as well as predators, but they're bodily designed. They don't have the compensation in their evolution that a prey animal would have, like a rabbit with the eyes on the side of the head.
No, I hear
so
you.
They're in this permanent state of neurosis because they have to overcompensate for not having those prey animal characteristics.
Qualifications?
Veterinary nurse.
That'll do nicely.
And work for a cat charity.
Can't say fairer than that. Round of applause for Ian, please. I hope Anthony is satisfied with that answer. I certainly am. Tim Humphrey is here with your headlines.
Mystery Hour with James O'Brien. This is LBC.
12:35 is the time. Normally, Mystery Hour is sacrosanct, but I confessed earlier to John, I think, asking the question about interest rates, that I had allowed myself to be distracted by more and more detail of allegations against Mark Menzies, the Lancashire MP who, as you just heard in the news, has now been suspended as a trade envoy. Where was he a trade envoy for? Goodness me. So I'm going to read you this one as well. More recently, Menzies' Lancashire constituency has been abuzz with gossip about a drunken incident at the last night of the Proms concert featuring Catherine Jenkins, held in the grounds of Lytham Hall in August. Menzies, who was invited to the event by the local mayor, is said to have turned up intoxicated and got into a row with other patrons after discovering that seats had not been reserved for his party within the VIP section. One attendee said the MP started kicking the chair. I get that right. One attendee said the MP, quotes, started kicking the chairs and poking the people on the front row. Right, now pay attention because this gets very funny towards the end. Creating a disturbance for ticket holders who had paid £150 each for the event. He was spoken to by security and appeared to be heavily intoxicated by the end of the concert. A source close to the MP acknowledged that he had had too much to drink, but said he hadn't intentionally poked anyone and may have done it by accident when waving a flag. Kiz in Cwmbran. Question or answer, Kit?
It's an answer.
Oh, ow! Stop waving that flag!
Tories will Tory, right?
Yeah, something like that. Go on then, what have you got?
It's about the interest rates. So, the guy was asking whether an increase in the rate would be automatic profit. It doesn't quite work that way because the banks will go to the other institutions and pay the going rate, which is directly related to the rate that the Bank of England set. So it's called a LIBOR rate. You might have remember the scandal a while ago. They all just go to the markets and borrow a load of money at that rate and then lend it out. But obviously, as the base rate changes, the rate that they pay will change. So it's not like they just go to the market for your little tiny chunk of mortgage, and therefore, when the rates change, they make a profit on that. It's a whole bank of money that they agree a rate on when they borrow it from the markets. But then, obviously, as the rates change, they pass that on. So it's not a direct relationship between the rates and the profits. It kind of, there's a bit of a lag. So it's.
But they will make so when interest rates go up, though. However, although they're not going to get all of John's money, it is. I mean, for a retail bank shareholder, that would be good news, would it?
It's 6 and 2 3s because obviously they'll make more money from the savings potentially because they pass that on too. But they borrow your money and then invest that. So the chances are when things are going well, even though they're paying you more on your interest, they'll be making more in profits for the underlying investments they got. But with regards to the borrowing, not really. It doesn't really matter because they'll have their fixed margin and they'll just pass that on. Whether it's
so it keeps keeps going down the line. So where does that £500 end up? If you to take John's question back to source.
Oh, it ends up in the ether through the markets because obviously the inter rates. Everyone gets their slice of it, so it doesn't just end up in
It does go a bit mad money, doesn't it? Once you push the questions, where does it go? Look, I pay £1,000 a month, and now I'm paying £1,500 a month. Where's that £500 a week next Tuesday?
That's a really good question. Nobody knows. So basically, because the whole system is interconnected. Yeah. Well, you don't forget what you're paying is money that they borrowed a long time ago.
Yes,
so
of course.
it's not a direct thing. So but it's like a whole pool of money. If you like. So,
no, I get that. So the answer is going to be it's a notional destination at some unspecified point in the future is where it's going to end up.
Probably some offshore Tory account. Yeah,
behave yourself.
Sorry.
Qualifications?
Financial advisor.
You can have a round of applause. I think, there might be room for embellishment or improvement, but I can hear people zoning out, which is part of the problem. It's why Martin Lewis is so adamant about why we need better financial education at school. 12:39 is the time. Alan is in Stewarton. I can have a guess at which one you're going to have a crack at from Ayrshire. Question or answer, Alan?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on. It's an oddly controversial question, this, isn't it? Which perhaps the questioner didn't even realise.
It could be controversial.
Go on then.
It could be. Okay, so the term originated early in the 20th century between an early meeting of the two teams where the commentators actually described the game as like a meeting between two old, firm friends.
There it is.
And that's where the term stuck from.
That's pretty strong. That gets you a round of applause. Qualifications?
Celtic supporter.
Why did people get in touch to say that this didn't apply after I forget exactly what year it was.
2012. Basically what happened is Rangers embarked on massive tax avoidance and the club was liquidated. So out of the grave of the old Rangers came a Phoenix club known as Sevco PLC. So the old firm has basically died, and in its place is now the Glasgow Derby.
But the phrase still persists, doesn't it?
Well,
or not?
One half of Glasgow.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Round of applause.
Thank you.
Welcome. David's in Brom. Actually, I should remind you of some of the other questions that we're looking for. So, ponytails, pigtails. Why? Cat trauma, we've done. Which language has the fewest vowel sounds? Old firm, we've done. Interest rates, we've done. How do sailing ships get going when there isn't any wind? Brackets, if indeed they do. And does the bewigged judge, is that peculiar to British law, British Commonwealth law? I don't think it is. Lots of people tell me French judges wear wigs as well. So what's the reason? What's the difference between a judge who wears a wig and a judge who doesn't? I'll embellish that question ever so slightly. That's all I've got at the moment. 12:41 is the time. And David is in Bromley. David, question or answer?
It's question, James. Good afternoon.
Yes.
So I want to tread very carefully here. I do not want to cause offence to anyone whatsoever. So I want to put that first.
Okay.
There's a people group that were once known as Red Indians.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to know how and where that originated. I know that's not the correct term.
No, I mean, so perfectly. You don't need to tie yourself in knots on this. Native Americans, we're talking about, or American Indians. Is it indigenous?
Yes.
Is it? Because what you've got the Indies, haven't you? You've got but I don't know what it's chicken and egg. What came first, the Indies
You're
or?
yourself in knots now. Yeah.
No, I'm not at all. But what came first? Naming the territory, the Indies, or naming the people Indian? I don't know. Is the short answer to that, or whether or not it's a complexion reference. It is just a lazy language to describe exotic foreigners, some of whom had brown skin if they came from the subcontinent, and the ones that were encountered in the New World had different complexions, which they chose to describe as red. So I don't know. What's the origin of the phrase Red Indian? There's nothing to worry about there, mate. That's a perfectly reasonable question.
All right, thank you.
You're very welcome. I shall put it on the board. 12:42 is the time. Chris is in Margate. Chris, question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on.
So it's the answer for the question about how the sailing ships go up the Thames when there's no wind. So you're quite right in saying, when there's no wind, and a sailing ship isn't going to do very well when there's no wind.
Yeah.
So there were numerous techniques that they could use. So the big ships would often use like berthing boats, or I suppose like an old style of tugboat, which would just be a bunch of strong crew members in small boats, small rowboats in front of them, and they would just row these enormous ships.
Because it's like Britain's Strongest Man, isn't it? Once you've got a tiny bit,
got it going.
Yeah, once you've got it going, it's a lot easier than it sounds. And they would do that by tugging.
Yeah, so they would tug the big ships in,
which is it? Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, but the Thames barges, which were going up and down the Thames all the time, bringing cargo in, they actually developed a technique which was called drudging.
Oh yes, with the anchors.
So what you'd do is you'd use the tide rather than the wind, and you would wait for the tide to be going up the river, if that's indeed the way that you're going.
Yes.
And you drop your anchor at the front, but not enough that it's going to take hold and stop you from moving. So it's bouncing along the bottom.
Yeah.
And then with the force of the tide, that anchor just keeps you facing the oncoming tide, and you can use your rudder to steer you as you go backwards with the tide, and you've just got just enough control from the anchor bouncing along the bottom of the river.
Was it? Is it difficult to do? Is it quite tricky to get the hang of?
Drudging is quite a difficult technique. Just knowing how much anchor to drop down so that it does just bounce along the bottom, because what you don't want is for it to completely hold. And obviously these old ships didn't have any sort of hydraulic winches for getting the anchor up and down, so you're relying on manpower to winch it back up again if you haven't got it far enough, or if you need to put a bit more down.
Qualifications?
So I'm a barge mate on a Thames barge, and we still often sail up the Thames. And some of the barges still don't have engines in them. So often have to figure out ways of getting up.
Was it a family? Is it a family thing? Were you born into? Is it?
No. I'm a member with the Thames Sailing Barge Trust.
Okay.
Which is based in Malden, in Essex. We've got 2 barges, and we still race the Thames barges on the Thames.
I remember that. Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen the races. So do you still compete for Doggett's coat and badge, or is it something else?
So there's a whole load of silverware, because the Thames Sailing Barge match is actually the second oldest sailing race in the world after the America's Cup.
Wow.
But the difference is we're still using the same boats that we used when it was first started. So
Blimey.
You might actually say that it's the oldest sailing race in the world.
Yeah. But certainly in terms of what actually goes on, it is just the name isn't quite as old as the America's Cup. I love that. That's a perfect answer and a richly deserved round of applause. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
I love the Thames. I know that sounds a bit partridgey, but I really do. It's always. I've lived near it now for absolutely yonks, and I'd really, really miss it if I didn't. My favourite bit at the moment is up with the old boatyards around Brentford, where if you squint, actually come back a bit, Chris. Is it true that the really fancy boat that they get out for the Royals on special occasions?
Oh yes, the Gloriana.
Where's that kept?
Well, it was kept in St Catherine's Dock, but I was in St Catherine's Dock just a couple of days ago, and it's not there anymore.
Do we know where it is?
It's been moved somewhere. Yeah, I don't know. It's mostly polystyrene.
No, I didn't know that, and I wish you hadn't told me.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. I mean, it's just not going to feel the same next time, is it? Going past, there goes that polystyrene boat. That sums up pageantry in a way, doesn't it? I don't want to get all Republican about it, but the royal family's been mostly polystyrene for years.
Yeah, very true.
I heard a rumour they kept it in Brentford.
I think you might be right. Yeah, I think it might be.
I've got a theory where it is. I think they keep it in a very nondescript.
I know one of the barge skippers was tasked with moving it not so long ago.
Lovely stuff.
But it's mostly carved polystyrene rather than that's then just been painted gold.
Do you know? It's funny you say that, right? Because I've got a gate post that needs a thing sticking on top of it.
Right.
And they cost thousands. Man, there's no earthly way I'm paying what they charge for one of these things.
Yeah.
But it has to match the thing on top of the other gate post.
Right, so you're thinking polystyrene.
I said to Mrs. O'Brien, let's get one made of fiberglass or polystyrene or something like that. Who's going to know?
Yeah, who is going to know?
If you clip it, obviously you're going to have a bit of a problem. You're going but until I might start. You've reinvigorated my idea. Did Chris get a round of applause? Did we give it? Well done, Chris. Thank you. I covered a lot of ground there, quite unexpectedly. Some of it. 12:48 is the time.
Mystery Hour on LBC with James O'Brien.
12:51 is the time. These questions still need answers. Ponytails, pigtails. Why? What language has the least vowel sounds? Down the ships. Wigs and judges. What's that all about, eh? And why were Native Americans known as, or Aboriginal Americans, indigenous Americans, why were they known as Red Indians? 0345 6060 973. Will's in Camberwell. Will, question or answer?
Answer.
Carry on, Will.
So it's the one you just gave. Christopher Columbus headed west to find a route to India, stumbled across Cuba, and thought he was in India. So he called all the people he met Indians. At the time, they would also have been quite tanned and quite West Hemisphere in the sunshine and stuff. And they looked different to him. So they were called Red Indians. But
pretty straightforward. I like that.
Pretty strict. And people up in Oka, which is up in Canada, they literally put red stuff on their skin for war paint, that kind of thing.
Oh, cool.
So the name stuck.
Qualifications?
It was a couple of years ago. Nothing else was on the telly. I watched a load of YouTube videos about the history of the Native Americans, and I'm not a hugely emotional person, but the trauma that they suffered really, really got to me, and I sort of looked into it and read about their history, and all the way they like to be addressed was an interesting thing. Yeah. My understanding is they like to be called by the tribe they're members of, so Lakota or Navajo or Cheyenne.
Yes.
An older generation quite like Indian because it's what it's sort of stuck as.
Okay.
Native American is a curious one. I was concluding, because if you look on YouTube, there's a really nice YouTuber guy, white Italian American guy. He speaks to an old medicine man, says, "Don't call me Native American. You're a Native American too."
Okay.
I to you am a Lakota.
Lakota, which refers to. I should try and remember that. I think I'd probably have the same response as you to stuff like that. I'm trying to remember what the phrase is on the New York Times crossword, because quite often tribes come up as clues because they've got a disproportionate amount of vowels in them, which is always helpful to people setting crosswords.
Right.
But I can't remember. But you've just said some of the answers that come up, like Cree, and is it Oti or yeah.
That's another one of them.
But I can't remember what the clue is. They give the clue, and then it could be one of those various answers. But yeah, don't know. Well, that you've covered a lot of ground there. Perfect qualifications. Round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you. Victoria's in Eppingham. Victoria, question or answer?
Answer.
Carry on.
This is not an academic answer. Just as a mother of 3 daughters, it's the pigtails ponytail thing.
Right.
I would say that you would only say pigtails if they're little toddlers with little ringlet bunchies. So they've got 2 ponytails, so bunchies, but they look like pigtails. They're fine hair. It's curled. But then once they get past that stage, you say bunchies.
I've never heard the phrase bunchies in my life.
No.
Bunchies?
Yeah. Bunchies, yeah. So you get 2 bunches of hair, and that's it.
But it's not a bunch. It's a ponytail coming out the side of your head.
2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, bunches.
Yes.
No, I thought you said bunchies.
Well, me and your person who called me, we were just debating it. Am I getting it wrong? But most people, I think we say, "Oh, should we do hair and bunchies?" But I think it's actually bunches.
Never heard bunchies before.
That's probably just me as a mum.
Sounds inappropriate. Come on my programme with your bunchies. Bunches. My sister had her hair in bunches when we were kids growing up. So you're right. So the pigtail. Do you know what? By Jove, I think you're right. I actually think you're right.
And it looks like little pig's tails.
You'd never say pig's tails to a sort of 12-year-old, would you?
No,
that
and
would be bunches.
Even I'd say up 3 and upwards, really, it stops. So once the hair gets thicker and straighter... I
think you've bloody done it, Victoria.
These mums, we know our stuff.
Because that... And so actually, the whole premise of the question was wrong, because they do look like pig's tails.
Yes, they do, and it's just 2 pig's tails.
A round of applause.
Thank you.
Beautifully done. Thank you. 12:55 is the time. Mike's in Winchester. Mike, question or answer?
Answer.
Carry on.
It's regarding the question about the languages with the kind of least amount of vowels and the highest amount of consonants. I wanted to put forward Adyghe, which is a Circassian language. So, for example, I think we hear about Boris Johnson's great-grandfather who was Turkish. I think his mother was Circassian, but otherwise they're not very well known.
Okay.
But I know that Adyghe only has 3 vowels, which, if I'm correct, is essentially just a, and and then there's about 55 consonants.
Crikey.
Or
rather, cracky.
I think one of the big reasons for that is because they have what's called a lot of ejective consonants. So whereas, for example, in the word paper, we would just pronounce a P as we would pronounce it.
Closely.
So they say or if they're saying the k sound in car, they could say car. It's where like a glossal stop
clicks,
is made.
like Bedouin click type things.
Yeah.
Do you
not quite...
speak it?
No, I don't. But I've looked into it in great detail.
Well, I want to hear it now, don't I, Mike?
Well, I could give. I mean, for example, they also have the sound, which is in Welsh famously, but they have an ejective version of that. So they'd have
like that.
Yeah.
And these are all. Yeah. I like this. I'll tell you what. It's a contender, isn't it, Adyghe?
It is.
But you don't know. You're just offering it up as a possibility. You've got no reason to think it might actually be the mothership of low vowel language.
Correct. I mean, I just know from being a sort of amateur linguist and hobbyist, I know that it's quite, it's regarded in the field as quite sort of special. Really.
It's up there.
Yeah.
Is it there or the way? You can have a round of applause. You've told me your qualifications, amateur linguist. That'll do nicely. What's the difference between an amateur linguist and a professional linguist? Getting paid for it?
Yeah, I don't get paid for this, no.
No. I mean, oddly, that makes me a professional radio presenter, but who'd have thought that, eh? Paul's in Manchester. Paul, question or answer?
Answer.
Carry on.
Wigs.
Yep.
The inheritance that we have for wigs in this country is basically from, you're quite right, Charles II, 17th century. Gentlemen wore wigs. Aristocracy was associated with the aristocracy. So the inheritance across the Commonwealth is that quite a lot of countries have wigs. We have Australia, New Zealand, some provinces in Canada, several African countries, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Botswana. You see it in the Caribbean.
Qualifications?
KC.
King's Well, and the Sunshine Band, or are you a lawyer?
I haven't got, and I'm not KFC either.
Why do they wear... Apparently people have seen French judges wearing wigs.
No, wrong. You're wrong.
Whoa, okay.
It contradicts the principles of equality. They abandoned it years ago.
Is that right? Oh, so someone's watching a historical drama, probably.
Yeah,
maybe.
It's
also, I didn't check, Paul.
Equality.
I didn't check when they said they'd seen a French judge wearing a wig. It might just have been for vanity. It might have been like a toupee.
Who knows?
It wasn't illegal.
The ridiculous situation we have now is in the Court of Appeal in England, you have the judges just wearing gowns and the barristers wearing full bottom wigs and silk gowns.
Crikey, that is a bit ridiculous. But it's earned you a round of applause.
Thank you.
There you go. Victoria wins this because I love the way that call just veered from me being a bit snarky and sniffy right through to me realising she was completely right. And also saying bunchies on the radio. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on... I'm 52, you know.
I came in a bit early just in case you needed help. I wasn't quite sure what I was hearing when you said bunchies.
If you catch up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty. 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 But now it's time